Chapter 1801. However, Morong Yu's heart tightened when he thought about how Chang Tian had already gone to break through the cycle of reincarnation. If Chang Tian had already broken through the cycle of reincarnation, he would have left the saint's world. But how big was the endless cosmos? Morong Yu didn't know, but it was vast and boundless. Once Chang Tian left, he didn't even know if he would have a chance to return. Thus, he would definitely kill Morong Yu before he left and take over his body. I really hope Chang Tian disintegrates in the cycle of reincarnation. Morong Yu couldn't help but sigh. Paragon Peerless nodded slightly. She hoped so too. In truth, all the paragons of the saints' world hoped so. Afterwards, Morong Yu chatted with Paragon Peerless for a long time. Finally, he had a clear understanding of the outer realms. However, when he mentioned the Tao Master of the Seamless Agency, Paragon Peerless fell silent. The Tao Master of the Seamless Agency was originally a paragon, and he was extremely powerful. He was a 9-star paragon. However, his origins are mysterious, and he almost never interacts with us. Most importantly, the Seamless Agency is extremely mysterious. Although they don't have many disciples, every single one of them has achieved great things. However, there are almost no disciples of the Seamless Agency in the outer realms. Morong Yu turned pale with fright. What was going on? All of this was far beyond Morong Yu's expectations. The Tao Master of the Seamless Agency was a paragon. Morong Yu had guessed this long ago. However, he hadn't expected the Tao Master of the Seamless Agency to be a 9-star paragon. He was actually so powerful. Morong Yu had always thought that the Seamless Agency had many seniors. However, even after he unified the Saints' world, he still hadn't discovered any seniors. Apart from 18 of them and the Tao Master of the Seamless Agency, Morong Yu hadn't seen the 20th disciple of the Seamless Agency. Even Paragon Peerless hasn't seen the other disciples of the Seamless Agency. Then where do they all go? Do they all go to the outer realms? But is that possible? Morong Yu was filled with doubts. The more he knew, the more he didn't understand. Had the Tao Lord of the Seamless Underworld perished? According to Autarch Peerless, many autarchs had ganged up on the Tao Lord of the Seamless Department. However, she did not know whether he had died or not, because in some places in the outer realms, even if one perished, there wouldn't be any phenomena in the heavens and the earth. Therefore, other people could not determine whether a supreme martial artist was dead or not based on the blood clouds and blood rain. As for Yanjia, he also seemed to have disappeared without a trace. He didn't even appear in the outer realm. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. With more and more doubts, Morong Yu had more and more questions in his heart. It seems that the infernal court isn't as simple as it seems. However, what secrets does the seamless tunnel hold? Morong Yu pondered. By the way, Wu Shuang, do you know Supreme Yuhua? Morong Yu shook his head to get rid of all the doubts in his mind. Then he suddenly recalled the matter of Supreme Yuhua. Yuhua had been one of the titled Supremes when she was alive. If she could be resurrected, then Morong Yu would have another titled Supremes to help him. It would be much easier to deal with Supreme, True Marshal, and the others. Hearing this, Supreme Peerless revealed a look of shock. Morong Yu, you actually know of Supreme Yuhua? Supreme Yuhua was a titled supremacy before me. Morong Yu rolled his eyes. How could he just know? Right now, a wisp of Yuhua's soul was in his body. However, he still nodded. That was a very long time ago. Legend has it that back then, the heavens had already taken control of the Holy Realm and all the Supremes. However, the Supremes back then were unwilling to be controlled by the heavens. Some even openly rebelled. Among them, Supreme Yuhua was the one who resisted the most. At the same time, Supreme Yuhua was also the strongest of the Supremes back then. However, no matter how strong Supreme Yuhua was, she was still just a supremacy. The difference in strength between her and a ruler was just too great. Back then, heaven was truly infuriated to the extreme, and it killed Yuhua right away. They suppressed the other Supremes who resisted. However, for some reason, Supreme Yuhua cultivated some sort of divine ability. Even though her body was destroyed, she was still unable to be killed. In the end, the heavens even extracted her soul and sealed it away for all eternity. At the same time, Nua's corporeal body was suppressed in different places by him. Although Nua wasn't killed, she couldn't be revived either. The only way to revive her is to find fragments of her soul and body. Otherwise, she'll probably never be revived. So that's how it was. Muronyu finally had a rough idea of what had happened to Supreme Nua. She'd been hemming and hawing all this time, wanting to tell him, but not wanting to. This had left Muronyu rather depressed. Muronyu, why are you suddenly asking this? Are you thinking of reviving Supreme Nua? Only now did Supreme Peerless react. He looked at Muronyu in confusion. Muronyu looked at Peerless. If I say yes, how will you react? Supreme Peerless immediately grew happy. If we can revive Supreme Nua, of course that's a good thing. In the future, we'll be even more powerful against rulers. However, how can it be so easy to revive her? That was indeed a problem. And right now, Muronyu was facing an even bigger problem. He didn't know where Nua's body and soul were sealed. I know where Autark Nua's fleshly body is imprisoned. However, I heard that her soul is sealed in the Heavens Palace. In the past, the heavens have always been in the palace. Now that he's left the saint's world to enter the cycle of reincarnation, it's the perfect opportunity to rescue her. As he spoke, Peerless had already recorded the locations of Nua's body into Muronyu's memories. There's no time to lose. Let's set off right now. She then urged Muronyu. Muronyu was speechless. Why did it seem like Peerless was even more eager than he was? Why was that? She wasn't thinking of devouring Nua, was she? Seeing the hesitant Muronyu, Peerless immediately understood. Thus, she fiercely glared at Muronyu. Brat, what are you thinking? Do you think I'm that kind of person? I just want to rescue Supreme Nua so that we can deal with the heavens. Wow, Peerless had become Muronyu's big sister. And she'd even guessed Muronyu's thoughts. Even Muronyu couldn't help but blush. However, he was no ordinary person. He seized the opportunity. Say, Big Sister Peerless, why would I have such dirty thoughts? Isn't the reason why I'm hesitating because things are moving too quickly? I'll have to talk to Supreme Nua about this. Peerless was stunned. You can communicate with Supreme Nua? However, Muronyu didn't answer her at all. His figure blurred and he vanished. This time, Muronyu was able to easily enter Nua's sacred palace because he had said something in Nua's sacred temple. He'd said that he was going to rescue Nua. And so, Nua didn't bother with her beauty sleep and teleported Muronyu inside. Muronyu didn't beat around the bush as soon as he entered. He told Peerless everything she'd said. She didn't hide anything from him anymore. After all, Muronyu's strength wasn't too bad. What Peerless had said wasn't wrong at all, but Nua's explanation was a bit more detailed. As long as I'm within a certain range, I'll be able to sense my soul and body. That's why you brought out Nua's holy temple when you went to the Outlands. I'll leave it to you for now. You can control it for now. As he spoke, Muronyu could already sense that he could control Nua's holy temple. Of course, he could only control part of it. He couldn't control it completely, but that was enough. The most important thing right now is my soul. It's being suppressed by Heaven's Palace. We have to rescue my soul first. Then, we'll rescue the other bodies. Nua analyzed. Muronyu nodded. That was inevitable. Otherwise, once Heaven returned, Muronyu would probably have to kill it to rescue Nua. But then, Nua wouldn't be able to help him. Since he was going to rescue Nua, he naturally had to maximize the benefits of doing so. But when Muronyu emerged from the Hichu Luo Shu, his mood immediately soured. Peerless had told him that Marshal Supreme and the others had found a way to enter the primeval world and were currently researching it. Once they figured it out, the primeval world would be in danger. It's Supreme, true Marshal again. Muronyu's eyes flickered with killing intent. These bastards would never stop until all of them were suppressed or killed. But you don't have to worry. It won't be that easy for them to enter the primeval world. Peerless comforted. Muronyu rolled his eyes. No one could say for sure. Who knew if they'd accidentally barge into the primeval world? Muronyu definitely wouldn't believe in such a probability. Thus, he had to make arrangements for Shenzhen before leaving the Holy World for the Outlands. He didn't want to save Nuwa only to have her killed by someone else. And so, Murong Yu returned to the primeval world. He used a few days to set up many teleportation formations to the God Realm. That way, even if Marshal Supreme and the others barged into the primeval world, they could easily retreat to the God Realm. Where there's life, there's hope. Murong Yu definitely wouldn't be afraid of retreating. Although retreating would be embarrassing, at least he wouldn't lose his life. After all, as long as he was alive, he could still get back what he lost. In fact, he could even get it back 100 times, 1,000 times. This was called a strategic retreat. Half a month later, Murong Yu left the Holy World with Little White and Peerless. They silently passed through the endless layers of chaos and headed for the primeval world. Their first stop was the palace of the ruler of the Holy World, Heaven. Chapter 1802. The Outer Realm was the legendary Outer Realm. As the name implied, it was outside the Saint's world. There was no special path from the Saint's world to the Outer Realm. As long as you found the right direction, you could enter the Outer Realm from anywhere. After all, according to Sovereign Peerless, the entire Saint's world was a huge sphere. The bottom layer of the Saint's world was the core layer, and then the void of the Saint's world. Beyond that was the chaotic layer. After passing through the chaotic layer, you would arrive at the legendary Outer Realm. However, the Outer Realm was still within the Saint world. It had not transcended the Saint's world. Strictly speaking, the Outer Realm was only a part of the Saint's world. It was just rather far from the core of the Saint's world. Along the way, Murong Yu finally understood how deep the primal chaos layer was. They continued to advance. During this process, they could not avoid encountering powerful and large numbers of chaotic beasts. However, there were only low-star supreme beasts in the chaotic layer at most. These beasts were fatal to experts on the Saint rankings, but they posed no threat to Murong Yu and Sovereign Peerless. After passing through the chaotic layer, the two arrived at the legendary Outer Realm. This was Murong Yu's first time in the Outer Realm. However, there was nothing special about the Outer Realm for Murong Yu. It was basically the same as the Saint's world. There are all sorts of terrains. However, the energy of the world here was all chaotic energy. As a result, all the sovereigns who cultivated here could only absorb chaotic energy. As a result, their energy more or less contained some chaotic energy. Roar! As soon as Murong Yu and Sovereign Peerless appeared in the Outer Realm, a thunderous roar rang out in front of them. After that, an extremely huge chaos beast pounced towards the two of them. Murong Yu's pupils abruptly shrank. This chaotic beast had actually reached the level of a 7-star supreme. As a result, he turned to Sovereign Peerless. Sister Peerless, I'll leave these demonic beasts to you. Supremacy Peerless glared at Murong Yu in annoyance, then made his move. It was just a palm strike. Bang! The Chaos Beast didn't even have time to react before it was smashed to smithereens by Supremacy Peerless slap. He couldn't be more dead. Murong Yu was speechless. The strength of a titled sovereign was truly too powerful. Unlike the Saint's world, the vicious beasts in the Saint's world usually appear in mountain ranges and various dangerous secret realms. However, there were ferocious beasts everywhere in the Outer Realm. Apart from some cities where we Supremes live and some specific places, there are ferocious beasts everywhere. Because of this, ordinary Supremes don't dare to casually roam the Outer Realm. However, these ferocious beasts were also great supplements for the Supremes. Their crystal cores contain extremely pure primal chaos energy, which can be directly consumed by Supremes for cultivation. As he spoke, Supremacy Peerless tossed the crystal core of the slain Chaos Beast to Murong Yu. To Sovereign Peerless, the crystal core of a 7-star Supreme was no longer of any use to her. In her opinion, the crystal core should be of great help to Murong Yu. However, what she didn't know was that Murong Yu was like a fish in water when he entered the primal chaos layer in the Outer Realm due to his unique constitution. He could directly absorb the primal chaos energy. Moreover, The tree of life within him had taken root in the endless primal chaos. It could devour vast amounts of primal chaos energy at any moment. However, the primal chaos energy couldn't directly increase Murong Yu's strength. As a result, if he wanted to increase his cultivation, he needed to refine items that contained tremendous amounts of primal chaos energy. His goal was clear, and he didn't know when Firmament would return to the Saint's world. As a result, Murong Yu and Sovereign Peerless didn't waste any time. They directly flew towards Firmament's palace. The outer realm was 10 times the size of the Saint's world, perhaps even larger. However, Murong Yu and Sovereign Peerless were extremely fast, especially Sovereign Peerless. However, when Murong Yu used his maximum speed, even Sovereign Peerless was stunned. At this moment, Murong Yu's speed had already surpassed that of a 7-star Supreme. He was comparable to an 8-star or even a 9-star Supreme. The speed was so fast that it shocked her greatly. It was exactly because of this that they appeared outside the Firmament Mountain Range very quickly. The Firmament Mountain Range wasn't originally called the Firmament Mountain Range. In fact, there weren't any mountain ranges where the Firmament Mountain Range was originally located. They were all taken from the outer realm by Firmament's great ability after he became a Supreme. Therefore, what appeared in front of Murong Yu was an incomparably majestic mountain that towered into the depths of the outer space. In fact, Murong Yu could even see streaks of light shooting into the sky from afar. At the same time, muffled roars constantly rang out from the Firmament Mountain Range. Numerous incomparably powerful auras intertwined with one another, causing Murong Yu's soul to tremble in fear. The Firmament Mountain Range has formed a natural formation. Its power is extremely terrifying. Even a 9-star supremacy could be killed if they entered by mistake. Moreover, the entire Firmament Mountain Range is filled with 8-star and 9-star Chaos Beasts and Outer Realm Beasts. In fact, it's rare to even see a 7-star beast. Gazing at the endless Firmament Mountain Range from afar, Sovereign Peerless was stunned. Supremacy Wushuang stood beside Murong Yu and explained the situation to him. These beasts were all captured by Firmament. Murong Yu asked with a frown. Sovereign Peerless nodded. Murong Yu grew even more confused. Why did you gather so many mountains to form a natural formation and capture so many ferocious beasts? Firmament is already the strongest expert in the Saint's world. What's there to worry about? Isn't that safe enough? Sovereign Peerless shook his head. How would they know? Because they rarely entered the Firmament Mountain Range. Even if they did, they would be summoned by Firmament. At that time, they would be directly teleported to Firmament's Hall. They had no way of knowing what was going on inside. There had to be a secret. This was something that all the sovereigns knew. However, no one dared to explore the secrets of the Firmament Mountain Range. No one even dared to approach it. Firmament would probably kill them on the spot if they dared to approach, not to mention the fact that Firmament was usually there to guard it. Even if Firmament had left the Saint's world to undergo reincarnation, no one dared to enter. After all, there were far too many beasts in the Firmament Mountain Range. Even titled sovereigns couldn't guarantee their own safety, let alone other sovereigns. We're probably the first people who've dared to enter the Firmament Mountain Range. Sovereign Peerless suddenly smiled at Murong Yu. This is your last chance. Sister Peerless, are you sure? You don't have to do this. If you go back now, you'll still be one of the 10 titled sovereigns of the Saint's world. Firmament won't do anything to you. But if you enter the Firmament Mountain Range with me, you'll be challenging Firmament. You might even be killed when Sovereign Peerless returns. Sovereign Peerless shook his head. We'll have to fight Firmament sooner or later. I have a feeling that regardless of whether Firmament succeeds or fails, we won't have a good ending. A battle with Firmament is inevitable. The more power we have, the more likely we'll be able to win. Murong Yu looked deeply at Sovereign Peerless. When he saw the resolute look on Sovereign Peerless' face, he didn't try to persuade him otherwise. It was just as Sovereign Peerless had said. He would have to fight Firmament sooner or later. Of course, he wanted to be as strong as possible. All right then, let's take the first step in our fight against Firmament. Murong Yu laughed heartily. He took the first step and charged into the firmament mountain range. However, before Sovereign Peerless could take the first step, Moronyu retreated at an even faster speed. Sovereign Peerless was taken aback, but she soon broke into a smile. The reason why Moronyu had returned so quickly was because he was being chased by a 9-star sovereign-level ferocious beast. Moronyu was strong, but there was still a long way to go before he could reach the level of a 9-star sovereign. Moreover, with Sovereign Peerless around, Moronyu didn't want to fight her at all. Now wasn't the time to cultivate, but to save someone. After laughing, Sovereign Peerless attacked, slapping the beast to death with a single palm strike. It was a clean kill. After collecting the beast's crystal core, the two entered the Firmament Mountain range once more. This time, however, Moronyu was much more careful and restrained himself. However, they soon encountered an obstacle. To be more precise, Sovereign Peerless had encountered an obstacle. A formation. A formation prevented Sovereign Peerless from going any further. However, it had no effect on Moronyu. Sister Peerless, if you trust me, why don't you enter the Hichu Luo Shu first? I have a way to enter the Firmament Mountain range, Moronyu finally said after a moment's thought. Sovereign Peerless looked at Moronyu in surprise. Even a titled sovereign like her couldn't break through the formation. How could a primal chaos ancestor like Moronyu do it? It wasn't that she didn't trust Moronyu, but that it was simply too shocking. Moronyu nodded gravely. Moreover, he had his reasons for wanting Sovereign Peerless to enter the Hichu Luo Shu. There were too many beasts in the Firmament Mountain range. If they went in openly, they would definitely alarm those ferocious beasts. No matter how strong Sovereign Peerless was, there was a limit to her strength. If Moronyu was alone, he could very well conceal himself and travel through different spaces at the same time. They quickly and stealthily arrived at the Firmament Palace. Why wouldn't I trust you? Sovereign Peerless laughed, then entered the Hichu Luo Shu. Gazing at the Firmament Mountain range, Moronyu first took a deep breath, then took a step forward and disappeared from where he stood. In Morongyu's eyes, formations were nothing more than empty shells. Moronyu only had to pay attention to the beasts. Chapter 1803. Morongyu's cultivation level was still too low compared to the 9-star supreme level beasts. Therefore, he had to be very careful during this process. If he was too fast, he wouldn't be able to conceal his aura completely and would be discovered by the beasts. However, because of this, his speed naturally slowed down. The Tsangtian Mountain range was vast and boundless. With Morongyu's current speed, it would take him hundreds of years to reach the Tsangtian Palace. What Moronyu lacked the most now was time. Who knew when the Tsangtian Palace would return? Once the Tsangtian Palace returned, Moronyu wouldn't be able to save Supreme Yuhua. After advancing for a while, Moronyu grew impatient. Therefore, he discussed with Supreme Peerless. Supreme Peerless didn't hesitate and immediately sent a powerful force into Morongyu's body, temporarily increasing Morongyu's strength. Whoosh! With Supreme Peerless' help, Moronyu didn't improve much in terms of speed. However, his ability to conceal his aura had increased tremendously. Therefore, he could advance quickly. At the beginning, Moronyu slowed down when he encountered the 9-star Supreme level beasts. However, when he realized that the 9-star Supreme level beasts didn't notice him, he became fearless. In less than 2 hours, an incomparably large palace appeared in Morongyu's line of sight. What a majestic palace! Looking at the huge palace, Moronyu was stunned. For a moment, he was stunned as he stared at the huge palace that looked like a dormant primordial supreme level beast. Whoosh! Whoosh! 2 figures appeared beside Moronyu. One was Supreme Peerless, and the other was Supreme Yuhua. However, at this time, Yuhua was only a body condensed from the power of the soul. It was not a real physical body. Supreme Peerless and Supreme Yuhua had seen the Tsangtian Palace before, so they weren't shocked. However, Supreme Yuhua was the first to get excited. My soul is in the Tsangtian Palace. I can already feel her presence. Yuhua's remnant soul was extremely excited. If not for her rationality telling her that this was the Sangtian Palace and it was full of danger, she would have charged indirectly. We have to think of a way to enter the Sangtian Palace. Supreme Peerless looked at the Sangtian Palace with worry. In her eyes, the Sangtian Palace was like a ferocious, primordial, supreme-level beast that lived between heaven and earth and would devour its prey. If they rashly barged in, it was likely that not even their bones would be left. Autark Nuwa had calmed down as well, although she could sense that her soul was being suppressed within. However, if they did not plan well, they could only retreat in the end, not to mention saving her soul. You two to enter the Sangtian Palace. I'll go in and take a look. With a wave of his hand, Murong Yu allowed Supreme Peerless and Supreme Nuwa to enter the He-Tu and Luo Shu. However, neither Supreme Peerless nor Supreme Nuwa entered the Sangtian Palace. Both of them knew how dangerous the Palace of Heavens was. Murong Yu was also too weak. Without their help, his life would be in danger as long as he encountered some danger. Be careful. You two enter the Sangtian Palace first, and be prepared to attack at any time. I'm not going to joke around with my life. Murong Yu explained with a smile. Supreme Peerless and Supreme Nuwa exchanged a glance, then repeatedly warned Murong Yu to be careful. Only then did they enter the Sangtian Palace. The Sangtian Palace was surrounded by layers of formations and restrictions. Murong Yu did a quick scan and found that there were no less than 100 million formations and restrictions covering the Sangtian Palace. Moreover, most of the formations and restrictions were killing formations. If someone tried to barge in, they would probably be killed before they even got close to the Sangtian Palace. Murong Yu couldn't help but feel a little dizzy. Chang Tian's strength was already the strongest person in the sacred world. Even titled Supreme Peerless wouldn't be much of a threat to him. But why did he set up so many killing formations outside the Sangtian Palace? Murong Yu had learned from Supremacy Peerless that these formations didn't appear only after Supremacy Firmament had left. Instead, they had always existed. Was Sangtian afraid of death? Was he afraid that someone else would kill him? Murong Yu shook his head and smiled helplessly. He was really speechless towards Sangtian. However, thinking about it carefully, Sangtian's caution wasn't without reason. After all, the reason why he became the ruler of the Holy World was because he killed the previous ruler. But how was the previous ruler killed by Sangtian? Others didn't know. However, Murong Yu guessed that Sangtian didn't kill the previous ruler by fighting fair and square. He must have used some kind of scheme. That was why he was so careful after becoming a ruler. After all, the previous ruler was recognized by the entire Holy World. He was much stronger than Sangtian. But wasn't he still killed by Sangtian? In terms of strength, Sangtian wasn't as strong as the previous ruler. The possibility of him being killed was much higher than the previous Supreme Peerless. Hence, it was understandable for him to be careful. With a thought, Murong Yu took a step forward. The billions of formations and restrictions had no effect on Murong Yu. Murong Yu walked over. Those formations only rippled as if he was walking through the void. He didn't touch any of the formations. Soon, Murong Yu arrived in front of the Sangtian Palace's main door. The door wasn't locked. However, Murong Yu didn't push the door open. Instead, he stood in front of the door and took a deep breath. Then, he communicated with Little White in the He-Tu Luo Shu with his divine consciousness. Naturally, Little White knew what Murong Yu meant. He nodded gravely and began to construct a spatial tunnel. Little White was much stronger than before. He'd entered the top 1,000 of the holy rankings. As a result, he was able to construct spatial tunnels much faster and more sturdy than before. After a few breaths of time, Little White had constructed a large number of spatial tunnels behind Murong Yu. As long as Murong Yu retreated, he'd be able to charge into the tunnels and be teleported out of Sangtian mountain range. As Little White constructed the spatial tunnels, Murong Yu made his move as well. He summoned all sorts of powerful treasures. In fact, the power of time and boundless banishment had already enveloped his entire body. As long as he sensed something amiss, he could immediately reverse time or banish himself. In short, Murong Yu had used all the defensive and escape techniques he could think of. Even Prime Peerless had raised his strength to the limit. After taking another deep breath, Morong Yu stretched out his hand and was about to push open the palace's door. Creak! However, just as Morong Yu stretched out his hand, the door to Songtian Palace opened automatically. Morong Yu's hand hadn't touched the door yet. In fact, his strength hadn't even touched it yet. However, the door was open. In other words, someone had opened the door from inside. This was Songtian's palace. Usually, only Songtian was inside the palace. Who could open the door? Could it be that Songtian had returned? Morong Yu's heart skipped a beat. At this moment, his heart stopped for a moment. If his strength was average, he would have been scared to death. However, Morong Yu's reaction was extremely fast. The moment the door opened, he retreated rapidly and was about to crash into the spatial tunnel that Little White had constructed. At the same time, he started time reversal and infinite banishment. He was about to send himself back to the past or banish himself to a faraway place. However, at this moment, a force that Morong Yu couldn't resist swept out from the palace and enveloped Morong Yu. Morong Yu didn't even have time to react before he was pulled into the hall. With a dang sound, the door to Songtian Palace closed. However, the palace was bright and couldn't block Morong Yu's sight. Swoosh! Morong Yu only felt that he was pulled into the palace by a force. In the next moment, he realized what was going on. However, just as he was about to resist, the force that he couldn't resist disappeared from his body. Morong Yu was even more shocked to find that the power of time and infinite banishment attached to his body had disappeared without a trace. It was impossible for Morong Yu to reverse time and banish himself. Firmament. As soon as Morong Yu came to a stop, a cry of surprise rang out by his ear. Then, two figures appeared beside Morong Yu. They were Autark Peerless and Autark Nuwa. The two of them had been forcefully dragged out of Hichu, Luoshu. The one who had cried out was Autark Peerless. Autark Nuwa didn't say anything. She only gritted her teeth as she stared at the dignified old man sitting on the main seat at the front of the palace. Only now did Morong Yu have the time to look over. What he saw made his heart stop beating. He was almost scared to death. After a long while, Morong Yu finally reacted. However, he still looked at Chong Tian, who was sitting on the main seat with a face full of shock. He's the ruler of the Saints' world? The legendary firmament? Even now, Morong Yu still couldn't believe that the old man was an autark. Thus, he still looked at Autark Peerless and Autark Nuwa with a questioning gaze. The two nodded. One of them was filled with shock and disbelief, while the other looked at Firmament with hatred. She wanted nothing more than to slap him to death. Morong Yu finally believed that this person was the ruler of the Saints' world, Firmament. However, he still couldn't believe it. This was far too unexpected. He had never thought that the high and mighty person who ruled over the entire holy world would actually be him. He wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. That was because this person was an old acquaintance of Morong Yu's. An old acquaintance. Chapter 1804. Brat, you don't recognize me? While Morong Yu was looking at Chong Tian in shock, Chong Tian, who was sitting on the main seat, was looking at Morong Yu with a smile. At the same time, what he said almost shocked Wu Shuang and Nuwa to the point of flipping over. It wasn't that his words contained some sort of sonic attack, but that they were simply too shocked. The sovereign of the heavens actually knew Morong Yu. In other words, Morong Yu actually knew the sovereign of the heavens. What was going on? In an instant, Wu Shuang and Nuwa's minds were thrown into disarray. When did Morong Yu know a ruler? Wasn't this his first time in the Outlands? Or was this all part of Morong Yu's and the sovereign scheme? Had Morong Yu specially brought them here? When they thought of this, Wu Shuang and Nuwa couldn't help but put some distance between themselves and Morong Yu. Wu Shuang and Nuwa were shocked, but Morong Yu was even more shocked. He'd never imagined that this person would be a sovereign. Who was this person? An old acquaintance of Morong Yu's. Morong Yu had already known this person back in the cultivation world. At the time, this person had recognized Morong Yu's worth, so Morong Yu was extremely grateful to him. At the time, This person was the enforcer of the Chinese cultivation world. Later on, after that person ascended, Yu had been searching for him. However, apart from a few times when he'd met Wuji and saved him from danger, Yu hadn't heard anything about him. For a long time, Yu had been considered the most heaven-defying existence in the world. Whether it was in terms of comprehension or cultivation speed, no one had ever been able to match him. However, Yu didn't think so. He knew that no matter how heaven-defying he was, there would always be one person ahead of him. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't catch up. The immortal realm, the god realm, the sage realm. Every time that person appeared, his strength would always leave Yu far behind. That person was Old Yonglin. Old Yonglin was the ruler before him, the heavens. It was only at this moment that Yu finally reacted. It wasn't that heaven's aptitude was more heaven-defying than his. Who else in the endless chaos could compare to a chaotic celestial body? No, Old Yonglin had always been ahead of Yu, not because of his aptitude, but because he himself was a ruler, the heavens. Or could it be that the Old Yonglin back then was just an incarnation of a strand of heaven's divine sense? This was easy to explain. As long as the heavens were willing, Yonglin's strength could be directly raised to the same level as him. Therefore, there was no such thing as aptitude. You are the sovereign of the heavens. Looking at the sky, Yu suddenly opened his mouth angrily. Autark Peerless and Autark Nuwa both turned to look at Yu in surprise. However, when they saw Yu's expression, they couldn't help but be stunned. Yu's face was flushed red, and his expression was one of utter fury. His eyes seemed to spit fire as he glared at the heavens, as if he wanted nothing more than to slap the heavens to death. Yu was indeed furious. Old Yonglin was a ruler with unparalleled strength. He was the most powerful existence in the entire holy world. Why had he chosen to incarnate into Huaxia's cultivation world? Not to mention that he wanted to enter the world to cultivate and experience all sorts of hardships to find a way to break through the cycle of reincarnation. Yu would never believe such an excuse. The heavens were definitely monitoring Yu. In other words, even when he was still in the mortal world, Yu had already been targeted by the heavens, and he'd always treated the person who'd been monitoring him as a benefactor. Only now did he realize that it had all been a huge scam. This was definitely a scam. Yu felt very hurt, which was why he was furious. Why? Yu glared at the heavens, his expression furious. It was as if the heavens had expected Yu's reaction. The heavens' expression didn't change at all. Or rather, it wouldn't be affected by Yu's emotions at all. Why? The heavens laughed. Do you know that you're a chaotic celestial body? Do you know that you could become a chaos controller? Yu gritted his teeth. He felt extremely angry at the person who deceived him. Of course I know. And you're monitoring me because you want to obtain my body? Chaotic celestial body? The heavens looked at Yu with admiration, as if it was very satisfied with Yu's intelligence. It's easy to talk to smart people. That's right. The reason I've incarnated into Huaxia's cultivation world is because of your body. Why didn't you seize my body earlier? Yu was still furious. The heavens shook its head. Why should I seize your body earlier? In the past, and even now, your body can't carry my soul. Therefore, you need to become stronger. Well, when you're strong enough to become a 9-star supreme, you should be able to carry my soul. When that time comes, I'll seize your body. Wouldn't that be great? The heavens was very straightforward and went straight to the point. Yu wasn't angry at this time. Instead, he calmed down. He'd already guessed that this would happen. Ha! Heavens, you've helped me resolve many crises because you don't want to die, right? Furthermore, if I'm not mistaken, my journey here has been smooth sailing. I've had fortuitous encounters wherever I went. All of this has something to do with you, right? Yu laughed, his voice filled with desolation. The heavens looked at Yu with even more admiration. It liked Yu even more. Yu, you're very smart. Unfortunately, you're a chaotic celestial body. If you weren't, I could take you in as a disciple. I don't care. Morong Yu snorted. He didn't have a good impression of old Yang Lin, who used to be the old man. Morong Yu, you don't have to be like this. If it wasn't for my secret help, would you be where you are today? Maybe you'd already be dead in the cultivation world. If it wasn't for my help, where would you have gotten so many treasures? How could your strength increase so quickly, so that you can take revenge as you please? The heaven's voice was still calm, unaffected by Morong Yu's words. Morong Yu sneered. Should I be thanking you? Thanking you for raising me like a pig, and then killing me when I'm fat? The heavens laughed and shook its head. Your analogy is too inaccurate. How can a pig be compared to you? And although the meaning is similar, at least you've been in the limelight, haven't you? If it wasn't for me, how could you be in the limelight now? So you should be thanking me. Morong Yu's lungs were about to explode from anger. The heavens were really shameless. Morong Yu didn't think so. Yes, with the secret help of the sovereign, he had indeed obtained many benefits. But even without the heavens' help, he was confident that he wouldn't have done too badly. At most, he would have to spend more time to reach his current level. But he could still reach his current level, or even higher. How about this? Your strength is still quite far away from a 9-star Supreme. Today, I'll help you kill Wushuang and Yuhua. As long as you refine the two of them, your cultivation should be able to reach the 1-star Supreme level. Then, with my help, you can refine all the other Supremes in the Holy World. If you still can't reach the 9-star Supreme level, I can refine the entire Holy World and let you devour it all. At that time, you'll probably reach the half-step Supreme level. In the Holy World, apart from me, you'll be the only one. Moreover, I can promise you that when the time comes, I'll only need your body. I won't harm your soul. In fact, I'll even help you refine the strongest body in the Holy World for you. When the time comes, as long as I leave the Holy World, you'll be its ruler. Insane. The heavens had definitely gone insane. Autark Wushuang and Autark Yuhua could only stare at Morong Yu in shock, then at the heavens. As they listened to the heavens' words, they couldn't help but cry out in their hearts. Only the heavens would think of killing all the Supremes, or even refining the entire Holy World. Only he had the ability to do such a thing. If the heavens had broken through the cycle of reincarnation, perhaps he really would have dared to do such a thing. Morong Yu laughed coldly. Refine the entire Holy World? If the Holy World is gone, why would you need a sovereign like me? Besides, do you have the ability? Do you have the ability to refine the entire Holy World? Chang Tian's expression turned gloomy. He stared coldly at Morong Yu. Morong Yu, cut the crap. Even if you don't want to, you have to. You have to become a 9-star supremacy. Do you really think you can kill me? Morong Yu sneered. The heavens laughed. Morong Yu, do you want to die? Without my permission, you won't even be able to die. In this life, you're destined to have your body taken over by me. Your fate is in my hands. Is that so? Morong Yu was unafraid. He really wasn't afraid of the heavens. I really want to know what makes you say that. Have you already broken through the cycle of reincarnation? If you have, then pretend I didn't say anything. But if you haven't even broken through the cycle of reincarnation, do you really think you can control my fate? You really think too highly of yourself. True sovereigns had to be acknowledged by the Holy World. However, the heavens hadn't been acknowledged by the Holy World. He had only forcefully refined 4/9 of the Holy World's origin. In other words, he could only control 4/9 of the Holy World. As for Morong Yu, he already controlled 2/9 of the Holy World. Strictly speaking, Morong Yu could be considered a pseudo-sovereign. However, he was still more powerful than the heavens. A cold light flashed across the heaven's face. However, he didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed. Then I'll show you whether I have the ability or not. Today, I'll refine these 2 women and increase your strength. Before he even finished speaking, the heavens had already reached out and grabbed at Morong Yu and the other 2. At that moment, Morong Yu, supremacy peerless, and supremacy Nuwa's expressions changed drastically. Even now, they still didn't know if it was the heaven's clone or the heaven's true body. Chapter 1805. The Sovereign of the Heavens had attacked. Yu and the other two were shocked. This was a sovereign, the strongest person in the saint's world. However, Yu's expression quickly returned to normal. At the same time, his eyes flickered with chilling, killing intent. Attack with all you've got. The sovereign of the heavens is still trying to break through the cycle of reincarnation. This guy is just a clone. He's probably not even a 10,000th of the sovereign's strength. Yu roared and attacked first. He took a step forward and smashed through space-time as he charged at the sovereign of the heavens. During this process, he had already raised his strength to the limit. He gathered it all in his right fist and punched at the sovereign of the heavens. At the same time, the saint's soul slash was unleashed at the sovereign of the heavens. On the other side, at the same time that Yu made his move, Supremacy Peerless and Supremacy Nuwa made their moves as well. Sovereign Nuwa was still fine. She was just a remnant soul and didn't have much strength. However, Sovereign Peerless was terrifying. She instantly unleashed her strongest attack. Suddenly, a terrifying aura burst out from her body. Under her control, it surged towards Firmament's clone like a torrential flood. Yu's aura stagnated. At that moment, he was like a lone boat in a stormy sea. He could be torn to pieces at any time. This was only the aura that leaked out. It wasn't even a 10,000th of the real aura. Even Sovereign Peerless aura had been used to attack the Sovereign of the Heavens. One could only imagine how terrifying Paragon Peerless attacks were. As she unleashed her aura, Sovereign Peerless took out her sovereign artifact, the Peerless Palace. A palace the size of a millstone erupted with a terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth. It smashed through the void and charged at the Sovereign of the Heavens. All of this happened in an instant. Seeing that Yu had seen through his disguise, the Sovereign of the Heavens couldn't help but laugh. However, his face was still filled with disdain and calmness. So what if it was just a clone? So what if it wasn't even a 10,000th of the Sovereign's strength? It was more than enough to deal with Yu and the other two. Break! Chang Tian roared out as he slapped the air in front of him. A terrifying power burst forth, instantly shattering Paragon Peerless aura into smithereens. On the other hand, the power of the firmament slap was not affected in the slightest. It rushed towards Yu and the other two in a ferocious manner. Puff! Puff! Before Yu's soul attack could even get close to the sky, it had already been shattered and turned into dust, dissipating into the air. At the same time, Yu's fist felt as if it had struck cotton. It was as soft as cotton, but very quickly, a powerful force bounced back. With a kacha sound, Yu's arm was directly shattered. That terrifying force directly bombarded Yu's body, sending Yu flying. At the same time, Chang Tian took a step forward and punched the unparalleled palace with his fist. Clang! After a deafening sound, the unparalleled palace, which was equivalent to a 9-star supreme, let out a sorrowful cry. In the next moment, it was sent flying just like Yu. Suppress him! Chang Tian roared as his hand locked onto Paragon Peerless' head. He wanted to suppress Paragon Peerless directly. Seeing how ferocious Chang Tian was, Paragon Peerless' eyes narrowed. Her figure flashed, and she retreated explosively. In the process, she still used all her strength to punch Chang Tian's attack. However, the difference in strength between them was too great. In the end, Paragon Peerless was still sent flying while spewing blood. On the other hand, Chang Tian's body only swayed a little. He was at the peak of titled Supreme. On the other hand, Chang Tian's clone was not even a 10,000th of Chang Tian's strength. Even so, the difference in strength between them was still huge. Paragon Peerless was no match for Chang Tian's clone. Then, how powerful was Chang Tian's original body? Titled Supreme? You're like ants. I only kept you alive because I wanted to increase Yu's cultivation. Otherwise, I would have killed you long ago. Chang Tian took another step forward as he spoke coldly. He reached out his hand again and attacked Paragon Peerless. Paragon Peerless was shocked, but she did not despair. Even if she was no match for Paragon Peerless, she would not give up. She would fight to the end. Therefore, She unleashed her strongest attack and attacked Song Tian's clone. However, Song Tian was too powerful. Paragon Peerless was no match for him at all. She was completely suppressed. However, it was not easy for Song Tian to suppress her. Of course, that was because Song Tian did not want to kill her. Otherwise, if Song Tian wanted to kill her, Paragon Peerless would not have been able to hold on for so long. What should I do? Murong Yu was sent flying, but he was protected by the Hichu Luoshu and other treasures. He did not suffer any serious injuries. However, Murong Yu did not make a move immediately as he watched the battle between Song Tian's clone and Paragon Peerless. He knew that with his current strength, he would not be able to threaten Song Tian at all. The origin energy of the holy world. Suddenly, Murong Yu's eyes lit up. The reason why he was certain that Song Tian was only a clone and not his original body was because of the holy world's origin energy. After all, the holy world's origin energy had seen Song Tian at his peak. Therefore, he could tell at a glance that this was Song Tian's clone. Song Tian had refined 4/9 of the holy world's origin energy. Of course, this was his original body. He would definitely bring all of the holy world's origin energy with him to break through the reincarnation cycle. In other words, his clone did not have the holy world's origin energy. Without the holy world's origin energy, Murong Yu was not afraid no matter how strong he was. Murong Yu took a step forward and appeared not far behind Song Tian. He roared in his heart, "Domain!" Whoosh! 2/9 of the holy world's origin energy was gathered by Murong Yu into Song Tian's palace, enveloping the entire place. In the next instant, the entire palace became a part of Murong Yu's domain. It was under Murong Yu's control. Suppress. Murong Yu roared in his heart. He had already controlled the origin energy to suppress Song Tian, who was attacking Autark Peerless. At this moment, Autark Peerless was in an extremely miserable state. Even though she had unleashed her strongest aura, she was still suppressed by Song Tian. As long as enough time passed, she would be completely suppressed by Song Tian. Song Tian was in no hurry to deal with Autark Peerless and the other two. Ever since Murong Yu and the other two had stepped into Song Tian mountain range, Song Tian had no intention of letting them leave. They could not leave at all. As a result, Song Tian was just a cat toying with a mouse. Song Tian definitely could not kill Murong Yu. Even if he wanted to, he would have to wait until he became a 9-star supremacy. As for Autark Niwa, she was just a remnant soul. What could she do? As a result, Song Tian's main goal was to suppress Autark Peerless. As long as Song Tian could suppress Autark Peerless and hand her over to Murong Yu to refine, he would be able to raise Murong Yu's strength to the supremacy level. It would be best if Song Tian could raise Murong Yu's strength to the 9-star supremacy level before Song Tian's original body returned from reincarnation. When that happened, Song Tian's original body would be able to possess Murong Yu's body. Song Tian would then be able to leave the saint's world and roam the starry skies. However, at this moment, an incomparably familiar aura suddenly rippled through the entire palace. Song Tian felt as if he had sunk into a swamp. It was difficult for him to even move. At the same time, an indescribable force rushed into his body and began to suppress his strength. In the blink of an eye, his strength had been suppressed. As his strength decreased, the rate at which it was being suppressed increased. A breath ago, he was still 3 times stronger than Autark Peerless. But in the blink of an eye, he was only twice as strong as Autark Peerless. And he was getting weaker and weaker. The origin energy of the saint's world. Song Tian's clone cried out in shock. The origin energy of the saint's world was actually attacking him. After all, he controlled 2/9 of the origin energy of the saint's world. As a result, he knew that the origin energy of the saint's world would not automatically attack him. Therefore, someone must be controlling the origin energy of the saint's world to suppress him. That person must be Murong Yu. It was actually Murong Yu. Murong Yu had actually received the acknowledgement of the saint's world's origin energy. How much of the Saint's world's origin energy had he refined? Song Tion's clone sent Autark, peerless, flying with a punch, then turned to look at Murongyu. His eyes were filled with killing intent. For the first time, Song Tion revealed his killing intent towards Murongyu. Song Tion's naked, undisguised killing intent. Although Song Tion would definitely kill Murongyu in the past, in his eyes, Murongyu was nothing more than a pig he was rearing in a pen. Once he fattened Murongyu up, he would slaughter him. A pig was no threat to his master. But now, Murongyu posed a huge threat to Song Tion. With the origin energy of the Saint's world, Song Tion had the ability to resist Song Tion. As long as Murongyu's strength skyrocketed to 9-star supremacy or titled supremacy, he would have the power to fight Song Tion. In the past, Song Tion had only risen to his position by killing the previous sovereign. Song Tion would never allow such a thing to happen to him. Therefore, Murongyu had to die. Song Tion had to snatch the origin energy he had obtained. Song Tion had only refined 4/9 of the origin energy. If he could refine 5/9 of the origin energy of the Saint's world, he would basically be in control of the situation. By then, no one in the Saint's world would be a threat to him. Brat, you've actually managed to control the origin energy of the Saint's world. Not bad. Song Tion's clone sneered and charged towards Song Tion. At the same time, he reached out with his hand and grabbed at Murongyu. I'm trying my best to suppress his strength. The two of you, kill him for me. Murongyu shouted at Wu Shuang and Nuwa when he saw Song Tion charging over with incomparable ferocity. While suppressing him with all his might, Murongyu also shouted at Wu Shuang and Nuwa. Chapter 1806. Wu Shuang and Nuwa were both titled supremes and had sharp eyes. How could they not see that Heaven's clone was being suppressed by Murongyu? Although they were shocked by Murongyu's sudden strength, they did not stop what they were doing. Instead, they unleashed all their strength and attacked Heaven's clone. At this moment, Murongyu had already used all of the origin energy of the holy world to suppress Heaven's clone. This was 2/9 of the origin energy of the holy world. When the origin energy turned into a suppressive force, the clone of heaven seemed to have been suppressed by 2/9 of the sacred world. The immense power suppressed Firmament's clone, making it difficult for him to breathe. His breasts were all over the place, and it was difficult for him to even move. However, it was just difficult for him to move. Even though Murongyu was suppressing him, he could not suppress Heaven's clone. After all, Heaven was simply too strong. In fact, not to mention Firmament's clone, even 9-star supremacy Murongyu would find it difficult to suppress it. Space storm, space barrier, time freeze. Aside from his soul power, Murongyu had also unleashed the laws of time and space as he frantically attacked Firmament. He did not use soul attacks. This was because Heaven's clone was only formed by Heaven's power and did not have a soul. Even if Murongyu used soul attacks, he could not hurt him at all. It was just a waste of energy. Under the terrifying attacks, Heaven's speed was finally slowed down. It could not be helped. Murongyu's goal was not to kill him, but to slow him down temporarily. The main attack was still relying on Supreme's Wu Shuang. Supremacy Peerless didn't disappoint Murongyu either. His attacks rained down relentlessly, causing Firmament's clone to roar repeatedly. Although they weren't able to kill it for the time being, Murongyu and the others soon discovered that Heaven's clone's strength was slightly weaker with every attack. It was not because Murongyu was suppressing him. Instead, it was because his strength was being depleted. After all, he was only a clone of Heaven's power. Without Heaven's endless supply of power, he would eventually dissipate and disappear from the world. Murongyu did not realize that there was any power replenishing Heaven's clone. There were two possibilities. One was that Heaven's original body was at the critical moment of breaking through reincarnation and could not spare any energy to replenish his clone. The other possibility was that Heaven was too far away and could not replenish his clone's energy. Let's work harder. We just need to deplete his energy. After realizing this, Murongyu heaved a sigh of relief. Now, They were in no hurry to kill Heaven's clone. They only needed to protect themselves and deplete his clone's energy. Supreme Peerless nodded and said to Supreme Nuwa, "Go rescue your soul, Nuwa. I can do it alone." Nuwa nodded and immediately withdrew from the battle. She began to sense her soul. "All of you must die." Was furious. As his energy continued to deplete, he became weaker and weaker. The weaker he was, the stronger Murong Yu suppression would be, and the weaker he would be. If this continued, even if his energy was not depleted, he would still be killed. Heaven's clone was furious. He wanted to suppress Murong Yu. However, what made him even more furious was that the source of the holy world was extremely powerful. He could even feel the source of the holy world's hatred and disgust towards him. In fact, Murong Yu could feel this as well. Normally, when he used the source of the holy world, it would not be so powerful. Right now, the source of the holy world was more than 10 times stronger than usual. This power was naturally released by the source of the holy world. This showed how much the source of the holy world hated heaven. Murong Yu did not find this strange. Instead, he was overjoyed. Power of faith, spatial slash. Murong Yu freed up his hands and released his strongest spatial attack. It contained the power of faith and slashed towards Heaven's clone. Facing Murong Yu's spatial attack, Heaven's clone merely sneered. He didn't care about it at all. After all, even if Murong Yu suppressed and restrained him, it was because of the source of the holy world and not because of Murong Yu's own strength. Murong Yu's strength was too weak. He could not defeat Heaven's clone. Therefore, Heaven's clone only threw a punch casually. Poof! However, the result shocked and angered Heaven's clone. As soon as they came into contact, Heaven's clone's hand was shattered. This was the first time Murong Yu had shattered his arm. Even though Chang Tian's arm had been shattered, Murong Yu's attack didn't stop in the slightest. He continued to crazily attack Chang Tian. Heaven's clone was extremely furious. He roared and threw another punch. Boom! Murong Yu's spatial slash was shattered in the void. However, Heaven's hand was shattered again, and it consumed a portion of his strength. Haha, Heaven, let's see how you're going to die today. Murong Yu laughed and attacked again. The battle continued. At the beginning, Murong Yu and the others were suppressed by Heaven. However, as time passed, the situation turned around. Heaven's downfall was even more obvious. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before Heaven's clone was killed. You want to kill me? You're still too naive. Heaven's clone had calmed down. He said with a gloomy expression. The next moment, rumble, the gate of the palace, which was originally tightly shut, was directly opened. At the same time, ferocious auras shot in from outside the palace. In the next moment, black shadows rushed into the palace. Then, they pounced at Murong Yu, Wu Shuang, and Nuwa with incomparable speed. Ferocious beasts. All of them were 9-star supreme level beasts. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of ferocious beasts rushed into the palace. Every single one of them was a 9-star supreme level beast. Murong Yu's pupils abruptly shrank. Now, they finally saw how to suppress Heaven. If these beasts were to join in, they would definitely die today. Unless he killed all of these 9-star supreme level beasts. Origin energy of the holy world, suppress. Soul storm. The entire palace was covered by Murong Yu's realm. The realm's power was more than 10 times stronger than before. It could easily suppress a portion of a 9-star supreme level beast strength. Murong Yu began to suppress these beasts. At the same time, his soul attack finally appeared. He threw out a soul storm. Plop, plop, plop. After the vicious beasts charged into the palace, 30 of them had their souls erased by Murong Yu. Under normal circumstances, Murong Yu wouldn't have been able to kill even one vicious beast, let alone 30. Everything was due to the origin energy of the holy world. Devour. Smelt the chaos furnace for me. With a thought, Murong Yu devoured the beasts whose souls were killed by Murong Yu. Then, the chaos furnace shook violently and smelted all of the beasts. A huge amount of energy surged into Murong Yu's body, raising Murong Yu's strength by a level. These were 39-star supreme level beasts. They were all refined by Murong Yu. If it were anyone else, they would have reached the supreme level long ago. Only Murong Yu needed a terrifying amount of energy, so they only raised their strength by a level. However, Murong Yu's strength also increased by a lot because of this. Moreover, there were more beasts in the palace for him to refine. Suppress, soulstorm, devour, smelt. The more beasts he refined, the stronger Murong Yu became. The stronger he was, the faster he could kill the beasts and refine them faster. The speed of increasing his strength was also faster. In a few breaths' time, Murong Yu had reached the peak of level 8 Chaotic Ancestor Sage. Then he broke through and reached level 9 Chaotic Ancestor Sage. His strength increased tremendously. An aura that was more than 10 times stronger than before erupted from his body and swept through the entire palace. Originally, when Murong Yu was level 8 Chaotic Ancestor Sage, he could already kill a 4-star Supreme level beast with his bare hands. Now, he could already kill a 5-star Supreme level beast with one punch. If he used the weapon fragments, it would not be a problem to kill a 7-star Supreme level or even an 8-star Supreme level beasts. Ha! Heaven, I really have to thank you. After breaking through, Murong Yu couldn't help but laugh loudly. Bastard! Firmament Sovereign roared furiously. He was extremely furious. Although there were many 9-star Supreme level beasts, they weren't enough to kill Murong Yu and Supreme level beasts. Supreme level beasts were still fine. When a large number of 9-star Supreme level beasts swarmed over, she was still in a mess. However, Murong Yu was killing them as easily as if he was slaughtering chickens. In this place, Murong Yu's combat strength was the strongest. Of course, this was because of the Berserk Holy World's source energy and soul energy. Although the beasts were strong, they were different from sages. They couldn't resist Murong Yu's soul attack at all. Heaven, why don't you just summon all the beasts here, so that I can reach Supreme level in one go? Murong Yu laughed loudly. Heaven Supreme was about to vomit blood in his heart. He wanted Murong Yu to increase his strength, but he definitely didn't want to do it under such circumstances. With a thought, he closed the palace's door again. There were more 9-star Supreme level beasts in the Heaven Mountain range. However, Heaven Supreme didn't dare to let them come over. They were only here to increase Murong Yu's strength. Wasn't that suicide? At this time, Murong Yu's strength had already reached mid-9th Order Ancestor Sage Realm. With my current strength, if I take out the weapon fragment, I should be able to heavily injure Heaven Supreme, right? Murong Yu thought in his heart. A trace of cold killing intent flashed across his eyes. Murong Yu's biggest trump card, the weapon fragment, hadn't been used because Murong Yu didn't have the confidence to kill Heaven Supreme in one strike. Now, Murong Yu had a 50% chance of killing Heaven Supreme in one strike. Therefore, Murong Yu made his move. Chapter 1807. Swoosh. Murong Yu threw out a punch. Elephant pulling fist. With all his might, Murong Yu threw out a punch. Instantly, a gigantic black fist broke through space and time. With a terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth, it flew towards Song Tian's clone. Seeing Murong Yu's attack, Song Tian's eyes flashed with disdain. The difference in strength between Murong Yu and him was too big. Song Tian had attacked him many times before, but he could not do anything to him. Even though Murong Yu had made a breakthrough in his cultivation, Song Tian did not take it to heart. Therefore, Song Tian did not think about blocking Murong Yu's attack. Instead, he kept attacking Supremacy Wushuang's clone. After all, as a titled Supremacy Wushuang had enough strength to threaten Song Tian's clone. Boom! Murong Yu's condensed fist fiercely slammed into the Azure Sky clone. Song Tian's face was full of mockery. Just as he was about to mock Murong Yu, his expression abruptly changed. At that moment, his heart was shrouded by a strong aura of death. Song Tian was shocked. Before he could react, He threw out a punch towards the energy that Murong Yu had thrown at him. However, it was too late. With a swoosh, a weapon fragment about the size of a palm shot out from the energy. Then, with a terrifying speed, it hit Song Tian's clone. Poof! With a muffled sound, Song Tian's clone was cut into two. This was the first time Song Tian's clone was severely injured. At that moment, Supremacy Wushuang, Supremacy Nuhua, and even Song Tian were stunned. You're courting death. How dare you injure my physical body? Even though Song Tian was cut into two, he did not die. Instead, he roared. Under his control, the body that was cut into two started to wriggle and was about to reform. Cut! Murong Yu's eyes shone brightly. He used all his strength to control the weapon fragment and slashed at Song Tian. Whoosh! 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 In an instant, the weapon shards had sliced Song Tian's body into 18 pieces. But Heaven Sky was still not dead. However, something that surprised Murong Yu happened. Every time the weapon shard killed Heaven, Heaven's power would increase by a bit. At the same time, Murong Yu could sense that the consumption of Saint's world origin energy from controlling the weapon fragment had decreased slightly. Could it be that the weapon fragments can devour the power of the heavens? Murong Yu thought to himself. However, his movements were not slow as he continued to slash at Heaven in a frenzy. Boom! Not long after, under Murong Yu's frenzied attacks, Chong Tian's clone finally exploded, turning into fragments of energy that shot out in all directions. Murong Yu, I will be back. At that time, all of you will die. Chong Tian's furious voice resounded throughout the hall. It was a trace of divine consciousness that Chong Tian had left on his clone. Although his physical body had been destroyed, his strand of divine sense hadn't been killed by Murong Yu. At that moment, it broke through the void and escaped from the hall. Slash! Murong Yu did not have a good impression of Chong Tian at all. With a thought, he controlled the weapon fragment to slash at the trace of divine consciousness. After a shrill scream, the trace of divine consciousness was slashed into powder by the weapon fragment. Chong Tian's clone was killed. Just as Chong Tian's clone was killed, somewhere in the depths of the endless chaos, a tall figure who was sitting in the void with his legs crossed shook violently. Then the expert opened his eyes. His doppelganger was destroyed? The expert's eyes shot out two beams of astonishment, and a terrifying killing intent erupted from his body. If Murong Yu was there, he would definitely see that the person looked exactly the same as Chong Tian's clone that he had slashed. He was Chong Tian's original body, and he was breaking through reincarnation. Just as Chong Tian was enraged and his murderous intent surged, his face turned pale. His face instantly turned pale, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Chong Tian's expression darkened, and he quickly calmed himself down. He was breaking through reincarnation now. If he was not careful, he would be killed. Wait until I break through reincarnation and refine the entire Saint's world. Then all of you will die. Chong Tian swore. However, he quickly suppressed this matter and focused on breaking through reincarnation. However, with Chong Tian's current mentality, the Saint's world would be in danger once he broke through reincarnation. You killed Chong Tian's clone? Seeing that Murong Yu had actually killed Chong Tian's clone, Supremacy Peerless and Supremacy Nuhua couldn't help but stare at Murong Yu in shock and disbelief. Murong Yu did not say anything. Instead, he opened his mouth and swallowed all the fragments of Chong Tian's clone into the chaos furnace. In the next moment, the chaos furnace shook violently and began to refine Chong Tian's power. In the Saint's world, aside from the supreme chaotic force, the power of the heavens was his power of the highest level. The clone's power was much greater and of a higher level than any supreme weapon. However, Murong Yu's strength had already reached the level of a 5-star sovereign. It wasn't difficult to refine this energy. Therefore, as he continued to refine the power, his strength increased rapidly. During this process, Murong Yu also diverted a portion of his attention to observe the weapon fragment. Before this, Murong Yu could not control the weapon fragment at all. He was using brute force to throw out the weapon fragment and forcefully kill it. However, Moron, you could vaguely sense an extremely weak connection with the weapon fragment now. There was a connection. This meant that Moron, you could already control the weapon fragment. This was how it recognized him as its master. Moron Yu took out the weapon fragment again. This time, he did not use the origin energy of the Saint's world. Instead, he grabbed it with his hand. Before this, even if Moron Yu's strength had reached the level of a rank 9 chaotic ancestor saint, he could not grab the weapon fragment. But now, Moron Yu had effortlessly grabbed the weapon's fragments. Although it was still quite heavy, as if he was grabbing an extremely huge, archaic sacred mountain. However, he could grab it now, could he not? Moron Yu was already quite satisfied with this. He waved the weapon fragment around. There was still nothing wrong with the weapon fragment, nor did it erupt with any power. However, Moron Yu could feel that even a 9-star sovereign would be split into two if he were come into contact with it. I wonder if I can control it with my divine thought. Moron Yu thought to himself. He had already used his divine thought to control the weapon fragment. Swoosh! The weapon fragment disappeared on the spot and shot into the distance. I can use my divine thought to control it. However, the consumption of divine thought is too terrifying. Moron Yu was overjoyed. However, he frowned immediately. The speed of the weapon fragment controlled by divine thought was much faster than when Moron Yu threw it out directly. Moreover, it was much easier to control it. It would hit wherever he pointed. However, the consumption of divine thought was too terrifying. Every second consumed a large amount of Moron Yu's divine thought. In the current situation, Moron Yu could not control the weapon fragment for long. However, he could control the weapon fragment as he wished. The faster the weapon fragment was, the more terrifying the weapon fragment's power would be. It was definitely a hidden weapon that was necessary for traveling and killing. Moron Yu kept the weapon fragment into his body. Previously, he kept it in his Hichu Luo Shu. It was not as convenient as keeping it in his body. At this moment, Moron Yu had already refined the power of Heaven's clone. Although much of it was wasted, Moron Yu's cultivation level was still raised to the peak of rank 9 chaotic ancestor sage. He was only one step away from breaking through to the supreme stage. I was just lucky. At this moment, Moron Yu replied to Supreme Peerless. It was indeed lucky. If Moron Yu had not broken through to rank 9 chaotic ancestor sage, he would not have been able to kill Heaven even if he used the weapon fragment. If it weren't for the fact that Moron Yu's continuous attacks couldn't harm Firmament, giving it the illusion that Firmament wasn't blocking his attacks, Moron Yu wouldn't have been able to kill Firmament's clone. Moreover, this attack was not only due to the weapon fragment. Moron Yu had also added a large amount of the power of faith to the weapon fragment. It could be said that there were many conditions to kill Heaven's clone. If one condition was not met, Moron Yu could forget about killing Heaven. Supreme Peerless and Supreme Yua were still looking at Moron Yu in disbelief. Moron Yu's sudden burst of power was simply too powerful. First, he restrained and suppressed Heaven's sovereign. Then he killed him. Although the two of them had also contributed, the main credit still went to Moron Yu. Did that mean that Moron Yu could even kill a titled Supreme? Moron Yu shook his head. It was just a fluke that he could kill Heaven's sovereign. Moreover, Heaven's sovereign had only stayed in the hall and had not left. If it was a titled Supreme, he would have left long ago if he felt that something was wrong. Why would he stand there and be suppressed by Moron Yu? Moron Yu guessed that Heaven's sovereign had left behind a clone only to guard his palace. Otherwise, his clone would not be sitting there waiting to be killed. However, since his divine telekinesis could control the weapon fragment, Moron Yu could even kill an 8-star Supreme in an instant if he wanted to launch a sneak attack. This was not his power, but the power of the weapon. However, Moron Yu was not confident that he could kill a titled Supreme. Supreme Yua, where's your soul suppressed? Moron Yu turned to look at Supreme Yua. This time, they were mainly here to save Supreme Yua, so they had to hurry up. Otherwise, when heaven's sovereign returned, he would kill the three of them with a single slap. It would be useless even if the weapon fragment was 100 times more powerful. It's below the palace. We have to get rid of the palace. Supreme Nuwa had already searched carefully and did not find her soul in the hall. Chapter 1808. Morongyu nodded his head. After scanning the entire palace with his consciousness, he took out the Hichu Luo Shu. Collect everything, Morongyu shouted. Instantly, the He-Tu and the Book of the Luo erupted with a powerful devouring power. All the items that were devoured into the He-Tu and the Book of the Luo. After a few breaths, everything in the palace was sucked into the Hichu Luo Shu. Not even a speck of dust was left for the Supremes. Come, let's go out. Morongyu kept Nuwa and Supremes peerless into the Hichu Luo Shu once again. Then, he strode out of the palace. Outside the palace, hundreds of millions of formations and restrictions were still in place. Fortunately, Heaven was confident in his strength and did not set up a large number of formations and restrictions in the palace. Otherwise, Morongyu would not have been able to kill Heaven's clone. He would have been killed instantly. Nuwa and Supreme's Peerless had already come out of the Hichu Luo Shu. However, they looked at Heaven's palace with a worried expression. The Stroll Formation and Restriction Array would be activated as long as they were touched. When the time came, they would be lucky if they didn't get killed, let alone being able to retrieve the palace. What should we do? Morongyu and the other two looked at each other. Morongyu had already checked once. Nuwa's soul was suppressed under the palace. If they wanted to get her out, they would have to tear down the palace. Otherwise, no other method would work. Because the palace was like the eye of the formation. There was no other way. These formations were too terrifying. Even titled Supremes and Supreme's Peerless did not dare to take them head-on. How could they break these formations directly? The formations that Heaven had set up were interconnected and could be activated at any moment. How could they be broken so easily? Even if Heaven were to return, he might not be able to break these formations. This palace is a half-step sovereign weapon. Otherwise, I could have used the unparalleled palace to take it in. Supreme's Peerless frowned. However, even if she couldn't do anything about it, Morongyu could. Hichu Luo Shu could even take a sovereign armament, let alone a half-step sovereign armament. This was because the Hichu Luo Shu was of a much higher grade than a sovereign armament. Even though Peerless Supremacy's Peerless Palace was a top-tier supremacy weapon, it was still a far cry from a pseudo-supremacy weapon. Let me try, Morongyu said in a deep voice. Use Hichu Luo Shu. With Hichu Luo Shu's space, storing the palace was a trivial matter. However, space was not a problem. The problem was how to fit it in. If he directly used the Hichu Luo Shu, he would not be able to store it. After all, Morongyu's strength was still far from that of sovereigns. The palace of Heaven's sky was fixed here by him using a great divine ability. However, Morongyu naturally had his trump card, the source energy of the holy world, domain. With a thought, Morongyu used the source energy of the holy world again. Instantly, with the palace as the center, the source energy of the holy world enveloped an area of 100,000 miles, forming a domain. Within the domain, Morongyu was the absolute ruler. Suppress them all. Morongyu roared in his heart as he controlled the domain to suppress the hundreds of millions of formations and restrictions. At the same time, the Hichu Luo Shu was brought out by him. It turned into the size of a sacred mountain and floated in the palace of Heaven. It opened a huge hole like a dormant ancient beast. Take it, Morongyu roared in his heart. The Hichu Luo Shu burst out with its strongest devouring power, covering the entire palace of Heaven. It was about to devour it. However, the palace was worthy of being a half-sovereign weapon. Although the firmament wasn't here, it still automatically resisted. Rumble. Heaven's palace burst out with a faint seven-colored holy light, trembling constantly. However, it was not devoured by the Hichu Luo Shu. In fact, during this process, the formations and restrictions left behind by Heaven were also stirring. Rumble. At this moment, a seven-colored holy light burst out from the palace of heaven and formed a huge seven-colored saber. It cut through the void, locked onto Muronyu and the other two, and slashed down fiercely. Its power was shocking. This was the attack of a half-step sovereign armament, which was equivalent to the attack of a half-step sovereign. The strength of a half-step sovereign was much stronger than that of a titled sovereign. Nuwa and Wushuang's expressions changed immediately. Nuwa, in particular, was only a remnant soul. She could not resist this attack at all and was in danger of being obliterated. A cold light flashed in Murongyu's eyes. With a thought, the power of the domain had already suppressed the saber. With a swoosh, the speed of the seven-colored saber was directly suppressed. At the same time, a black ray of light shot out from Murongyu's body. It tore through the void at lightning speed and landed on the rainbow-colored battle blade. With a bang, the seven-colored saber was directly cut into pieces. The weapon fragments were of a higher level than a sovereign armament, let alone an attack from a half-step sovereign armament. It could not withstand a single blow. However, this was not the only attack from the Palace of Heaven. The seven-colored saber continued to slash down, covering the sky and the earth. A terrifying aura rippled through the entire sky. Muronyu was furious. It was fine if it was just a clone of heaven, but now even the Palace of Heaven dared to be so arrogant. While he was furious, the power of the domain frantically suppressed the Palace of Heaven. Rumble, the Palace of Heaven shook violently. It must be unwilling to be suppressed by the power of the domain. However, how could a half-step sovereign armament that was not controlled by its master overturn the heavens? Moreover, it was not only Muronyu that was suppressing it, but also 2/9 of the origin energy of the holy world. In other words, Muronyu used 2/9 of the holy world to suppress the Palace of Heaven. Even the clone of heaven could not break it, let alone his Palace of Heaven. Slash it! Muronyu was furious. His divine thought controlled the weapon fragment to turn into a stream of light and slash directly at the Palace of Heaven. Clang! After a loud bang, the weapon fragment was directly bounced back. At the same time, Muronyu's mind was also shaken. The blood and chi in his body started to churn like a tidal wave. On the other hand, the seven-colored holy light of the Palace of Heaven, which was originally light but extremely bright, dimmed at this time. Obviously, although the Palace of the Heavens was not directly shattered, part of its power had been consumed. It was effective. A cold light flashed in Muronyu's eyes. His divine thought controlled the weapon fragment and slashed again. Clang! 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 A series of ear-shattering noises continued to ring out. With each slash, the light of the Palace of Heaven dimmed a little. At the same time, the power of the formation weakened a little. The Palace of Heaven is absorbing the power of the formation to replenish its consumed power. Supreme Peerless' eyes shone brightly as she said in a low voice. She was very interested in the weapon fragment that Muronyu had taken out. It was because the weapon fragment was simply too powerful. In that case, let's break these formations and restrictions directly. Muronyu shouted and continued to control the weapon fragment to attack crazily. During this process, Muronyu even found that the connection between him and the weapon fragment was getting stronger. Although it was still faintly discernible, it had strengthened after all. Being able to strengthen the connection was a good thing. Could it be that the more we use, the stronger the connection between us? Or the more we use, the higher the compatibility? Yes, that must be it. Muronyu thought in his heart, but a smile had already appeared on his face. Since using it could strengthen the compatibility and increase the connection, he would continue to strengthen it. Although his divine thought was greatly consumed, it could still be recovered after it was used up. Moreover, the higher the compatibility, the less divine thought was consumed. Muronyu could already feel it clearly. The compatibility between Muronyu and the weapon fragment was getting stronger and stronger, but the rainbow light emitted by the Palace of Heaven was getting dimmer and dimmer. Some of the formations on the periphery were even starting to fall apart because a large amount of power had been extracted. Muronyu, work harder. The palace of heaven is about to be destroyed. At this moment, Nuwa and Supreme Peerless actually had nothing to do. They just stood beside Murongyu and shouted. Two titled Supreme Peerless were actually no match for a chaotic ancestor sage. If this news were to spread, many jaws would fall to the ground. However, Nuwa and Supreme Peerless were already used to it. To a certain extent, Murongyu was already stronger than them. The origin energy of the holy world, the power of faith, and the mysterious weapon fragment. With these existences, they could defeat Murongyu, but it would be extremely difficult to kill Murongyu. If they were not careful, Murongyu could even kill them. Murongyu's rise could no longer be stopped, unless heaven returned to the holy world. Otherwise, Murongyu would be able to do whatever he wanted in the holy world. However, Murongyu was well aware of his own difficulties. The origin energy of the holy world, the power of faith, and even the divine thought were not endless. After using them in large quantities, these things were about to be exhausted. The origin energy of the holy world was still fine. Even if it was exhausted, it would not take long to recover. However, it was difficult to recover the power of faith. Moreover, the divine thought was not that easy to recover. Without these, Murongyu would not be able to kill an 8-star or even a 7-star Supreme Peerless, let alone a quasi-ruler weapon. Right now, Murongyu's origin energy of the holy world and the power of faith were about to be exhausted. However, Murongyu was somewhat comforted by the fact that Firmament Palace was also being bombarded to the point of no return. Let us lend you a hand. Seeing that the formations were about to be destroyed, Supreme Peerless and Supreme Peerless finally made their move. Supreme Yuan was not much. She was just a remnant soul and could not display too much battle strength. However, Supreme Peerless battle strength was shocking. With the help of the two, the light of the palace of the heavens quickly dimmed. Finally, clang, after a loud bang, the light of the palace of the heavens completely dissipated. In fact, the entire heavens palace was sent flying. Chapter 1809. Whoosh. Just as the palace was sent flying, Hichu Luoshu, which had been hovering above it all this time, charged down as well. This time, the palace of the heavens could no longer resist and was swallowed by the He-Tu and the Book of the Luo. At the same time, Nuwa's remnant soul charged towards the palace. But soon, she was sent flying back. The reason was that there were still millions of formations and restrictions beneath the palace. Murongyu and the others were speechless. Nuwa's soul was only being suppressed here. Was there need to go to such lengths? However, Murongyu and Supremacy Peerless were equally confused. Who exactly was Supremacy Nuwa? She was just a titled Supremacy. Even heaven couldn't kill her. Why was heaven only able to suppress her? Moreover, it was as if they were afraid that Nuwa would run away. It'll take at least a few years to break these formations. Supreme Wushuang probed with his divine sense, but his face quickly darkened as he spoke in a deep voice. Supremacy Nuwa's expression darkened as well. She could clearly sense that her soul was being suppressed below. However, she couldn't get any closer despite being so close. It was a torturous feeling. They had no choice but to break these formations by force. Supremacy Peerless sighed and prepared to attack. She only hoped that heaven wouldn't return while they were breaking the formations. However, even if heaven didn't return, there was no guarantee that the other supremacies wouldn't rush over to cause trouble. Moreover, there were many 9-star supremacy-level beasts in the Heaven Mountain Range. These beasts were roaring furiously and charging over. Supremacy Peerless had unleashed her titled Supremacy Aura and temporarily suppressed the situation. However, she couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't be able to suppress these beasts. If these beasts swarmed over, even Supremacy Peerless would have no choice but to retreat. Why go through so much trouble? Murongyu said with a smile, having already retrieved the He-Tu and Luo Shu. Supremacy Peerless and Supremacy Nuwa's eyes lit up. They had actually forgotten about the evildoer Murongyu. He was truly a monster. No formation or restriction could stop him. Although there were many formations and restrictive spells suppressing Goddess and Vaiwa's soul, how could they stop Muronyu? Under the expectant gazes of Wushuang and Yuhua, the two titled Supremes, Muronyu took a step forward and charged into the endless array formations and restrictions. The billions of formations and restrictions did not react at all. On the other hand, Muronyu moved again. He walked straight towards a brocade box in the center of the formation. All along the way, Muronyu was completely unobstructed. He walked through the myriad of formations and restrictions, and it was as if he'd entered an uninhabited place. He reached out his hand and grabbed the brocade box. The brocade box contained Autark Nuwa's soul. He watched as Murongyu's big hand quickly reached for the brocade box. Autark Nuwa's heart began to race. The closer Murongyu's hand got to the brocade box, the more nervous Nuwa became. Whoosh! Finally, Murongyu's hand came into contact with the brocade box. However, Nuwa's heart also thumped violently. Murongyu didn't immediately pick up the brocade box. On the contrary, a grave look appeared on his face. Both Supremes Nuwa and Wushuang knew that something must have happened to Murongyu. Supremacy Nuwa, in particular, was extremely nervous. Under the gazes of the two girls, Murongyu slowly loosened his grip on the brocade box. Then, he took a step forward and appeared beside the two women once more. Murongyu, what's going on? Supremacy Nuwa anxiously asked Murongyu, a look of apprehension on her face. That brocade box is connected to the billions of formations in the entire formation. As long as it's activated, it will affect the entire formation. If my guess is correct, once this formation is activated, all of the formations in Skyfall Mountain Range will be activated. When that happens, the entire Skyfall Mountain Range will be razed to the ground. As for the might of the formation, I'm afraid that even a titled sovereign would be reduced to dust. Murongyu looked at the two girls and explained with a grave expression. Actually, Murongyu couldn't see through this. What he saw was Hichu and the source of the holy world. This was especially true for he too, who was a formation expert. After Murongyu had summoned him, he too had studied the Tsang Tian mountain range and discovered these terrifying formations. Hearing this, Supremacy Nuwa and Murongyu couldn't help but reveal a look of lingering fear. At the same time, they cursed the heavens in their hearts. The heavens were truly sinister. If someone had really activated these formations, then even titled supremacies wouldn't have been able to escape Skyfall Mountain Range and would have been killed. Fortunately, Murongyu had discovered this. Otherwise, the three of them would have been turned to dust. Murongyu, let's forget it. Let's leave first. They were so close to her soul, but they couldn't touch it. It would be a lie to say that they weren't disappointed. However, Nuwa wasn't someone who couldn't see the big picture. If they had the ability, they could have taken her soul. However, they didn't have the ability now. Anyway, she still had a strand of her soul that was free, and the sovereigns couldn't kill her completely. At most, they wouldn't be able to recover their peak strength. However, Murongyu shook his head. How could he give up now that things had come this far? His current enemies were very strong. They were titled supremacies and heaven. Heaven was the strongest existence in the holy world. Murongyu didn't expect Nuwa and the others to help him deal with heaven. However, Supreme True Marshal and Murongyu needed Nuwa and the others' help. After all, Supreme True Marshal was already researching a way to enter the immemorial world. Once they entered the immemorial world, Murongyu could only retreat to the immortal world or the god world. However, the god world and the immortal world were too weak. With Supreme True Marshal and the others' methods, they could probably destroy the god world. Could Murongyu only be able to escape in the holy world? Murongyu didn't want that to happen. Therefore, before heaven returned, he had to get rid of Supreme True Marshal and the others and unify the holy world again. Then, he would have more power to search for the remaining source of the holy world. Then, he would have more time to search for items that contained enormous power and refine them to increase his strength. Then, he would have more power of faith to increase his strength. These are the most basic things to deal with the sovereigns of heaven. Without enough strength, Moronyu could only wait for death. He didn't want to be refined by heaven. Leave the Heaven Mountain range. The further, the better. I'll try, Moronyu said to Nuwa and Wushuang with a serious expression. Before the two of them could say anything, Moronyu had already entered the array of millions and millions of arrays. Nuwa and Wushuang had no choice but to leave the Heaven Mountain range quickly. Although there were many 9-star Supreme Beasts in the Heaven Mountain range, they couldn't stop a titled Supreme who was determined to leave. Therefore, the two women were hundreds of millions of miles away from the Heaven Mountain range in no time. Because of Morongyu's warning, after sensing that the two women were far away from the Heaven Mountain range, Morongyu made his move. Time reversal. Infinite exile. Morongyu even entered the Hichu Luoshu himself and communicated with the teleportation. As long as he willed it, he could teleport away. After making all the preparations, Morongyu stretched out his hand from the Hichu Luoshu and grabbed the brocade box. Whoosh! The brocade box was easily taken away by Morongyu without much resistance. Rumble! Just as the brocade box left its original location, an extremely strong aura of death rose in Morongyu's heart and enveloped his entire mind. At the same time, hundreds of millions of arrays were activated. Suddenly, beams of intense holy light shot into the sky, and waves of destructive aura swept wildly in all directions. The mountains were instantly annihilated, and the sky was constantly torn apart. Even the space turbulence appeared. However, the space turbulence was torn apart as soon as it appeared. Once it was triggered, the whole body was affected. Far away from Sangtia Mountain Range, Wushuang and Nuwa, the two titled Supremes, looked at Sangtian Mountain Range in shock. At this moment, the Heaven Mountain Range no longer existed. Everything was completely destroyed in an instant. In just a moment, the entire Heaven Mountain Range had been razed to the ground. From afar, the place where the Heaven Mountain Range used to be was like a huge black hole. It was eerie and terrifying. Not a single 9-star Supreme-level beast managed to escape. In fact, they might not even have the time to react before they were killed. Everything was annihilated. The two women couldn't help but feel scared. If they were still in the Heaven Mountain Range, they probably wouldn't have been able to escape. In their fear, they couldn't help but curse the heavens in their hearts. However, they were more worried about Morongyu. Where was Morongyu? A worried look appeared on the faces of the two women. This was because they didn't see Morongyu. They didn't even know if something had happened to Morongyu. Cough, cough. There was a dry cough. Then, Morongyu's figure appeared in front of the two women. However, Morongyu was in a sorry state. His clothes were ragged, tattered, and covered with mud. Morongyu, are you all right? The instant they saw Morongyu, the two women's faces lit up with pleasant surprise as they spoke in unison. Nuwa didn't care about her soul. Instead, she was worried about Morongyu. Morongyu shook his head. I'm fine. As he spoke, he had already handed the brocade box with the soul sealed in it to Nuwa. Nuwa received the brocade box with trembling hands. This was the box that sealed her soul. Now, she only needed to rescue her sealed physical body, and she could recover her physical body. It was equivalent to being resurrected. Morongyu, thank you. After being excited for a while, Nuwa thanked Morongyu sincerely. Although Morongyu made it sound easy, she didn't think that Morongyu was really like what he said. Just now, he must have experienced an extremely dangerous situation. Even if Morongyu saved Nuwa because of himself, no matter what, Morongyu saved Nuwa. This alone was enough for Nuwa to owe Morongyu a favor in her life. Therefore, she thanked him willingly. Chapter 1810. The Heaven Mountain Range and everything within it had been completely destroyed. There would no longer be a Heaven Mountain Range. However, Heaven Mountain, who was in the midst of breaking through the cycle of reincarnation, was unaware of this. Apart from Morongyu and the other two, no one else knew about this for the time being. However, this matter could not be concealed. It was only a matter of time before the Supremes found out. However, so what if they found out? It would not affect Morongyu at all. At this moment, Murong Yu and Yua had already entered Hichu Luoshu once again. Hichu Luoshu transformed into a speck of dust and attached itself to Supreme's Peerless. Supreme's Peerless brought her towards the place where Supreme's Nuwa's head was suppressed. Murong Yu had already reached the peak of the primal chaos ancestor's saint realm. However, he was still not a Supreme's. His strength was still far from that of a high-level Supreme's. However, his enemy was a Supreme's. Therefore, Murong Yu was seizing every moment to increase his strength. If it was in the past, Murong Yu would not have needed to cultivate so bitterly. Hadn't he taken Heaven Mountain's palace? Heaven Mountain's palace was a half-step Supreme's weapon. Although a half-step Supreme's weapon was far inferior to a true Supreme's weapon. However, it was still much stronger than a Supreme's weapon of a titled Supreme's. For any Supremes, if they could obtain a Supreme's weapon, their battle strength would definitely increase by several times. However, Murong Yu already had a weapon fragment. Although it was only a fragment, it was much more terrifying than a half-step Supreme's weapon. Therefore, Murong Yu did not need to keep Heaven Mountain's palace. He was prepared to refine this half-step Supreme's weapon to break through to the Supreme's realm. In any case, this half-step Supreme's weapon could not be used by others. It was better to increase Murong Yu's strength. Therefore, Murong Yu did not hesitate to swallow this half-step Supreme's weapon. Primordial Chaos Furnace, refine it for me. Murong Yu accelerated Hichu Luoshu's time to the limit, and then began to refine it. The primal chaos furnace trembled violently, so much so that even Murong Yu's body trembled slightly. Murong Yu's expression changed slightly. His spiritual force had already rushed into the chaos furnace. Surprisingly, the half-sovereign weapon hadn't been refined yet. On the contrary, it burst out with rainbow-colored holy light. It rushed left and right in the chaos furnace, wanting to break out of the chaos furnace and escape. Humph! A cold light flashed in Murong Yu's eyes. Even at this point, this half-sovereign weapon still wanted to escape? Was that even possible? Suppress him! Murong Yu immediately channeled the world energy of the He-Tu and the Book of the Luo and the origin energy of the Saint's world into the chaotic furnace, directly suppressing the palace. The palace of the heavens shook vigorously. He wanted to resist the suppression of these two great powers. However, he was already injured to begin with. He was injured by the fragments of the weapon. Moreover, it wasn't just the origin energy of the Saint's world that was suppressing him. With a swoosh, the palace of the heavens was suppressed and fell to the ground of the chaos furnace. Even the rainbow-colored light that burst out of it was suppressed and retracted back into its body. Humph! Murong Yu, you want to refine me? Wishful thinking. At this moment, a spiritual force came from the palace of the heavens. It should be the device spirit of the palace of the heavens. Murong Yu just sneered. He didn't even bother to talk to it. He just used the chaos furnace to the extreme and refined it crazily. However, after a long time, the palace of the heavens still didn't move. It couldn't be refined at all. Murong Yu, give up, let me go. You may still live in the future. Otherwise, you will definitely die when the heavens returns. The device spirit of the palace of the heavens sneered. Show off. I'll let you continue to show off. Murong Yu sneered. He couldn't refine the palace of the heavens now, but it didn't mean that he couldn't refine it. With a thought, the weapon fragments had pierced through space and appeared in the chaos furnace. When it saw the weapon fragments, the palace of the heavens couldn't help but tremble, although it couldn't feel the specific registration of the weapon fragments. It instinctively sensed that the weapon fragments were far more powerful than it was. Now it was suppressed and couldn't move. If the weapon fragments wanted to kill it, it would only end up being smashed into pieces. Slash! Murong Yu's spiritual force controlled the weapon fragments and slashed at the palace of the heavens. Clang! After a loud noise, the palace of the heavens was directly slashed out. At the same time, a thin crack appeared on the palace of the heavens. It wasn't that the weapon fragments weren't powerful enough, but that Murong Yu couldn't exert more power from the weapon fragments. However, this was enough. With a thought, the weapon fragments turned into black shadows and slashed at the palace of the heavens crazily. In just a moment, the weapon fragments slashed the palace of the heavens millions of times. Morong, you'll be killed by the heavens. Everything you have will be a wedding dress for the heavens. The palace of the heavens device spirit cursed Morong crazily. Morong didn't care. Would he care so much about a device spirit? Besides, between him and the heavens, only one would live. This was already destined. Boom! Finally, when the weapon fragments slashed at the palace of the heavens again, the palace of the heavens finally burst into pieces. When the palace of the heavens exploded, the weapon fragments killed the palace of the heavens device spirit with a single slash. Looking at the palace of the heavens that had been shattered into billions of pieces, Morong roared and began to refine it. Although the palace of the heavens had lost part of its power, this was something that couldn't be helped. However, these fragments still contained a huge amount of power, which was enough for Morong to break through. Like a torrent of pure power, Morong crazily rushed into Morong's body. Morong had already reached the peak realm, but under the impact of this terrifying power, he began to loosen up. However, although the peak realm seemed to loosen up, he couldn't take the last step. Moreover, during this process, Morong actually felt that his current state wasn't his limit. His power was still increasing, but it hadn't reached the limit. Under the accumulation of power, Morong's battle strength was also constantly increasing. Before this, he could already kill a 5-star Supreme with one punch. But now, his strength had reached a new level. Even if he attacked with his bare hands, he felt that he could kill a 6-star Supreme. If combined with the domain and weapon fragments, killing an 8-star Supreme would be no problem at all. His battle strength was constantly increasing. Therefore, Morong wasn't in a hurry. He didn't have to worry about whether the Palace of the Heavens could help him reach the Supreme Realm. In any case, it was fine as long as his strength continued to increase. In the Outer Realm, Supremacy Peerless brought Hichu, Luoshu, and flew towards the place where Nuwa's head was suppressed. All of a sudden, rumble! Without any warning, a lot of rainbow-colored light suddenly descended from the sky. At the same time, the entire sky of the Holy World, including the Outer Realm, was covered by rainbow-colored clouds. In just an instant, the entire Holy World seemed to be living under the rainbow-colored light. Everything in sight was filled with rainbow-colored light. Someone had become a Supreme. Supremacy Peerless, who was rushing forward, suddenly stopped. She was shocked at first. Then, she sent her divine sense into Hichu Luoshu. She wanted to see if Morong had broken through. At the same time, everyone in the Holy World was given a fright. Especially those Supreme Being experts. They were even more astonished. No one had been able to break through to the Supremacy Realm for countless years. Today, someone had done it. Who was this person? When Sun Feiyong and the others broke through to the Supremacy Realm, it wasn't really a breakthrough. They had only refined the corpses of supremacies. But apart from Sun Feiyong and the others, no other supremacy had died in the Holy World. In other words, this person hadn't become a Supreme by refining the corpses of supremacies. Instead, he had become a Supreme through his own cultivation. Of course, it was also possible that this person had refined the corpses of other supremacies. Before they could confirm who had broken through to the Supremacy Realm, all of these possibilities were possible. The Supremes were more inclined towards the latter possibility. After all, it was far too difficult to break through to the Supremacy Realm by relying on one's own strength. What's going on? This supremacy has already broken through. Why hasn't the phenomenon disappeared? After a while, the Supremes were puzzled. They had also experienced such phenomena when they became supremacies. But most of them had only lasted for an instant before disappearing without a trace. The stronger the heaven and earth anomaly was, the greater the potential of that expert after becoming a supreme being. Their future achievements would also be greater. A day later, the faces of all the Supremes in the Holy World darkened. That was because the phenomenon had yet to disappear. The entire holy world was enveloped in seven-colored holy light. It was like a fairy tale world. Who is it? Many people were puzzled. The phenomenon actually lasted for a day. This person's potential is enormous. He will at least become a 5-star supremacy in the future, and the time needed to become a 5-star supremacy will be shortened indefinitely. One of the Supremes frowned. However, on the second day, the heavenly phenomenon finally disappeared. This allowed the Supremes to heave a sigh of relief. Although this person's talent was heaven-defying, surpassing the majority of Supremes, it wasn't heaven-defying enough to make one's hair stand on end. Morong, you didn't break through? When Supremacy Wushuang's divine sense entered Hichu Luo Shu, she saw that Murong Yu was still cultivating. He hadn't broken through at all. Then, who was the one who broke through to the supremacy realm? Hearing this, Murong Yu didn't even open his eyes. He only smiled. He was confident. This was the feeling that Murong Yu gave Supremacy Wushuang. And Supremacy Wushuang felt that Murong Yu would definitely give her a huge surprise. Chapter 1811. Boom! Just as everyone was sighing and guessing who it was that had become a supreme being with such great potential, a loud boom resounded across the entire holy world. At the same time, a seven-colored holy light that was even denser than before enveloped the entire world. The seven-colored clouds were so dense that they even reached into the holy world. Even ordinary sages could reach out and touch the clouds. If the heaven and earth anomaly from before was several times stronger than the heaven and earth anomaly from before, then this heaven and earth anomaly was 1,000,000 times stronger than the one from before. Those supreme beings and sages were still sighing and guessing who it was that had become a supreme being. And now, they were even more shocked. All of them were stunned. What's going on? 2 people broke through to the supreme being realm consecutively? Are supreme beings so worthless now? They broke through just like that? One had to know that for countless eras, there had only been supreme beings who had fallen in the holy world. There had never been a new supreme being. But now, 2 people had broken through in 2 months? What was going on? Moreover, each of them had greater potential than the other. After the shock, all the sages calmed down. Since it was already the truth, even if they were shocked, even if they were unhappy, so what? Could they stop this person? Perhaps those high-star supreme beings could kill these 2 new supreme beings. But where were the 2 new supreme beings? They didn't even know where they were. How could they kill them? I want to see how long this person's phenomenon can last. The supreme beings were all curious. They were all guessing how long the phenomenon would last. Time passed day by day. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. After a month, the phenomenon showed no signs of dissipating. In fact, no one saw any signs of it dimming. It was exactly the same as when it had first appeared. What a monster! This person definitely has no problem becoming a 9-star supreme being. He might even become a titled supreme being. Those supreme beings sighed. They were all envious and jealous. They wanted nothing more than to replace that person. In the blink of an eye, another month had passed. It said that when the heavenly ruler broke through to the supreme being realm, his phenomenon lasted for 2 months before disappearing. Does this person have the potential to become a supreme being in the future? The faces of the supremes of the holy world turned green. It wasn't easy for them to wait for the Jizun to go through reincarnation. Regardless of whether heaven succeeded or failed, it would be a release for them. But now, before he could truly be free, there was another person who could possibly become the ruler of this world. Murderous aura surged, killing intent bursting forth. This person must die. He had to find this person. We must not allow him to grow. At this moment, all the Supremes had the same thought in their minds. Titled Supreme Martial Artists were powerful, but at least there were other titled Supreme Martial Artists who could fight against them. Moreover, titled Supremes were unable to dominate the holy world. Ordinary Supreme beings, like them, would be able to live well. Of course, this was on the premise that they didn't offend those titled Supreme beings. But sovereigns were different. They ruled over the entire Saints world. They stood at the top of the pyramid, but in the eyes of the sovereign, they were nothing. As a result, They were unwilling to see another ruler appear in the saints' world. Therefore, they wanted to kill this person. However, was this person someone they could kill just because they wanted to? 3 months. For months. Half a year. The worldly phenomenon didn't seem like it would disappear. It continued for half a year without dissipating. A year's time was just a blink of an eye to all the sages. However, the year that the saints' world was enveloped in rainbow light was as long as a reincarnation cycle to them. Finally, after an entire year, the heaven and earth anomaly silently dissipated. The sages finally heaved a sigh of relief. However, their hearts were heavy. Especially the powerful supremes, their hearts were heavy. A worldly phenomenon that existed for 2 months could allow one to become a ruler. What about a year? How much potential did he have? What would he achieve in the future? Primal Chaos Controller. In this year, many people had already guessed that Murong-Yu had broken through to the Supreme Being realm. It made sense. Apart from him, a heaven-defying chaotic celestial body. Who else would be so abnormal? Only Murong-Yu could be so heaven-defying. Primal Chaos Controller. This was an existence even more terrifying than the sovereigns. The sovereigns only ruled over a single saint's world. However, the Primal Chaos Controller controlled the entire Primal Chaos, regardless of how many saints' worlds there were. Everyone felt a deep sense of powerlessness. However, the Supreme's killing intent became even more intense. Previously, they didn't know who their target was. Now that they knew it was Murong-Yu, they directly want to find Murong-Yu. So what if Murong-Yu had great potential? He was only a 1-star Supreme Being. Any one of them would be able to kill him. Murong-Yu must die. We must open the passage to the primordial world as soon as possible. We must capture Shenzhen's people and force Murong-Yu to appear. Supreme True Marshal's eyes flashed. However, if it was just him alone, it would take a very long time to break through the primordial world. Therefore, in order to deal with Murong-Yu, he even invited the titled Supremes of the demon race and the sacred race. The 8 Supremes studied the primordial world with all their might. They wanted to capture Murong-Yu's family and Shenzhen to force Murong-Yu out. Even if the world said they were shameless, they could only do this. After all, they were already enemies with Murong-Yu. Even if they didn't do this, Murong-Yu would find them and kill them. Of course, Murong-Yu would definitely not find them when he wasn't strong enough. Instead of waiting for Murong-Yu to grow stronger before finding them, it was better to force Murong-Yu out and get rid of him. The 8 Supremes hit it off and jointly studied the way to enter the primordial world. Under the joint efforts of the 8 Supremes, the way to enter the primordial world gradually became clear. At this time, Murong-Yu was still outside. Then, was the second person to break through to the supremacy realm Murong-Yu? That's right, it was Murong-Yu. Unknowingly, Murong-Yu had already cultivated the chaotic celestial records to the great perfection realm. Therefore, he didn't need to comprehend the barrier to the supremacy realm at all. Once he accumulated enough power, he naturally broke through. Middle stage 1-star supremacy. When they saw Murong-Yu's cultivation level, Supremes Peerless and Nuwa almost fainted. The heaven and earth anomaly created by this fellow was so shocking, and his cultivation level had risen to the mid-stage of 1-star supreme martial artist in this 1 year. Was there any justice in this world? One had to know that even if others broke through to the supremacy realm, their cultivation level was still unstable. They still needed many years to stabilize their cultivation. And after that, they still needed to cultivate bitterly. It would take countless eras before they could continue to improve. But Murong-Yu did it effortlessly. It was as easy as eating and drinking. Even though Peerless and Nuwa were titled Supremes, they couldn't help but feel a little indignant. They were also some of the top geniuses in the holy world. But compared to Murong-Yu, they were practically trash. Just luck, just luck. Murong-Yu chuckled as he checked his current strength. It was definitely luck, because Murong-Yu only had his current strength after refining the palace of the heavens. And now, where was he going to find a half-step sovereign weapon for him to refine? If he didn't find such powerful items, Moronyu might not be able to raise his cultivation level by much in an entire reincarnation cycle. After all, the amount of power he needed was simply too terrifying. If he just cultivated slowly, his cultivation speed would definitely be incomparably slow, so slow that it would make one's hair stand on end. It shouldn't be a problem for me to kill a 6-star supremacy with a single punch now. If I add soul energy, faith energy, the source of the holy world, and the weapon fragment, I can kill an 8-star supremacy. I'll even be able to put up a fight against a 9-star supremacy. If I launch a sneak attack, killing a 9-star supremacy won't be impossible. But there's still a gap between me and a titled supremacy. Murongyu pondered as he looked at Sovereign Wushuang, his eyes blazing with battle intent. Seeing the battle intent in Murongyu's eyes, supremacy peerless eyes glinted. This kid could already suppress Heaven's Clone when he was only a level 9 Primal Chaos Ancestor Sage. Now that he's become a 1-star supremacy, he can probably suppress a titled supremacy, right? Even if I could defeat him now, killing him won't be easy. What Supremacy Peerless didn't know was that Murongyu had only been able to kill Heaven's Clone by luck. The reason why he suppressed the other party was because the other party was just a power clone. Because Heaven's Clone didn't have a soul, it was easy to suppress it. Moreover, Heaven's Clone didn't even have a supremacy weapon back then, which titled supremacy didn't have a supremacy weapon, or even more supremacy weapons. Murongyu really didn't have much confidence in fighting them. I wonder if I can kill Supremacy Peerless if I suddenly take out a weapon fragment? Murongyu looked at Supremacy Peerless, a crazy thought appearing in his mind. If Supremacy Peerless knew that Murongyu had such a thought, would she take out the unparalleled palace and suppress Murongyu? If I have the chance, I'll find Supremacy True Marshal and the other titled supremacies and see if I can kill him. Murongyu thought to himself. Supremacy Peerless was his friend, so he definitely wouldn't attack her. As for Supremacy True Marshal and the others, they would have to fight sooner or later anyway. Murongyu didn't mind killing them with a sneak attack. Just as Murongyu was thinking about whether he should give Supremacy True Marshal a surprise, Supremacy Peerless stopped. They had arrived at their destination. Meanwhile, Murongyu had already walked out of the He-Tu and Luo Shu. This was a vast and boundless ocean, with raging waves crashing against the shore. Amidst the endless raging waves, a barren island appeared. Beneath this island was Supremacy Nuwa's head. Chapter 1812. The Outer Realm was the same as the Chaos Layer. It had the same terrain as the Saint's World. Mountains, oceans, and so on all existed. However, all of this had to do with the power of chaos. This was because they were all condensed from the power of chaos. Beneath the barren island was Autarch Nuwa's head. Murongyu and the others stood 100 million kilometers away from the island, gazing at it from afar. On the other hand, Murongyu's brows were slightly wrinkled. The island is filled with 9-star supremes. Moreover, the entire island is enveloped by countless formations and restrictions. Ordinary people would trigger these formations before they could even get close. In the end, they would be reduced to dust by the formations, explained Paragon Peerless. The places where Nuwa was sealed were no secret. All the Paragons knew about them. Quite a few of them had even tried to take advantage of her in the past. After all, if they could refine a part of her body, it would be extremely beneficial to them. However, even the heavens couldn't do anything to Nuwa, let alone them. Moreover, the heavens were an extremely selfish person. He couldn't refine Nuwa himself, nor did he want anyone else to refine her. As a result, the places where Nuwa was sealed were forbidden grounds. No one was allowed to approach them. Anyone who tried would be killed without question. If it weren't for the fact that the heavens had already gone to attempt reincarnation, Paragon Peerless wouldn't have dared to bring Murongyu and the others here. After all, a ruler would kill them. The formations and the beasts aren't a problem. Stand here. I'll go take a look, Murongyu said indifferently as he took a step forward. With a single movement, he vanished from where he was. When he reappeared, he was already on the barren island. Roar! Before Murong-Yu could regain his footing, an earth-shattering roar was heard. Afterwards, a large, furry hand tore through the sky, carrying with it a terrifying aura that could destroy the world as it smashed towards Murong-Yu. A cold light flashed through Murong-Yu's eyes. With a single thought, the weapon fragment turned into a stream of black light and shot out from his body. It shattered the void and went straight for the kill. Poof! The weapon fragment pierced through the body of the nine-star, supreme being ferocious beast, causing blood to spurt out. Roar! The ferocious beast let out a painful roar. It smashed through the void and charged over an extremely fast speed. He wanted to slap Murong-Yu to death with his claws. Not dead, Murong-Yu was a little surprised. Originally, he thought that he would be able to kill the ferocious beast after using the weapon fragment. But now he was still alive. Holy Soul Slash! After recovering from his shock, Murong-Yu sneered. He used a soul attack and slashed at the soul of the beast. Ever since he had broken through to the one-star sovereign realm, all of his combat skills have been enhanced, and they were much more powerful than before. Facing a soul attack, the beast instinctively felt danger. However, ferocious beasts were still ferocious beasts. How could they have the soul of a saint? It didn't even think of protecting its soul. Poof! The ferocious beast's soul was shattered by Murong-Yu's slash. A 9-star supreme being ferocious beast was dead. He killed a 9-star supreme being ferocious beast just like that. Wu Shuang and Nuo were speechless when they saw Murong-Yu kill a strong ferocious beast with a flip of his hand. Murong-Yu was only a 1-star supreme being. If he was a 1-star supreme being like Yao Tian, he wouldn't be able to kill a 9-star supreme being ferocious beast. Even if he saw a ferocious beast of this level, his legs would go soft. In fact, what the two ladies didn't know was that Murong-Yu's soul had already broken through to the 8-star supreme being level when he was still a chaotic ancestor saint. That was equivalent to the supreme being level, although Murong-Yu's soul hadn't broken through yet. However, the power of his soul was constantly increasing. Especially after he broke through to the supreme being level, his soul power became even more terrifying. Moreover, the power of Murong-Yu's soul attack depended entirely on the strength of his cultivation. The stronger his cultivation, the more powerful his soul power would be under the same level. Of course, this was only when he killed a ferocious beast. If it was a 9-star supreme being, Murong-Yu wouldn't have been able to kill it so easily. With a thought, Murong-Yu kept the ferocious beast's corpse into the Hichu Luo Shu. This was a supreme being. After refining it, his power would increase a little. Taking a step forward, Murong-Yu continued to shoot toward the place where Nuo's head was sealed. However, before he could take a second step, another ferocious beast charged toward him. This time, it wasn't just one but 3 ferocious beasts. Origin energy of the holy world. Suppress them. Murong-Yu couldn't be bothered to tangle with these ferocious beasts. He immediately activated his domain and suppressed these ferocious beasts. At the same time, he launched his soul attack again. Puff, puff, puff. These ferocious beasts couldn't resist Murong-Yu's attack at all. Their souls were directly destroyed. In the end, they were all kept into the Hichu Luo Shu by Murong-Yu. He continued to move forward, but more ferocious beasts had already charged toward him. Kill! Murong-Yu wasn't afraid at all. He activated his domain and suppressed all the ferocious beasts that entered it. They no longer had the strength of a 9-star supreme being. However, Murong-Yu's strength wasn't affected at all. After a while, these ferocious beasts were no match for Murong-Yu at all. No matter how many came, they would be killed. Domain. Soul attack. Weapon fragment. With the 3 combined, Murong-Yu was like a killing god from ancient times. He was so fierce that these ferocious beasts couldn't fight back at all. A large number of ferocious beasts were killed. The thick smell of blood filled the entire island. This agitated all the ferocious beasts on the island. Therefore, more and more ferocious beasts roared and pounced toward Murong-Yu. Outside the island, in the distance, Seeing Murong-yu standing alone against thousands of ferocious beasts with terrifying strength, Wu Shuang and Yuhua felt their scalps go numb. They were titled supreme beings, but their strength was limited. If there were only a few 9-star supreme being ferocious beasts, they wouldn't take them seriously at all. However, if there were too many of them, they were no match for them. Even a titled supreme being would run out of strength at some point. Once their strength was exhausted, they would be torn apart by these ferocious beasts. However, Murong-yu was getting more and more terrifying as he fought. His fighting spirit was soaring, brave and fierce. Wu Shuang and Yuhua didn't see any signs of Murong-yu running out of strength. His strength was like a torrent, endless and endless. After his strength broke through to the supreme being level, the tree of life grew stronger and stronger. Every moment, it could devour a vast amount of chaotic energy from the depths of chaos and pour it into Murong-yu's body. Now, it was difficult for Murong-yu to run out of strength, even if he wanted to. Kill. In the face of more and more ferocious beasts, Murong-yu also became crazy with killing. He didn't take the initiative to kill these ferocious beasts, but these ferocious beasts were courting death. Murong-yu unleashed his maximum combat strength. After a big battle, he became more and more familiar with the strength of the supreme being level. His combat strength was more than twice as strong as when he just broke through. This was actual combat experience that increased his combat strength. He was crazy with killing. While killing the ferocious beasts, Murong-yu kept refining the beasts that were killed. Therefore, in the battle, Murong-yu's strength became stronger and stronger. In the end, the ferocious beasts were scared of killing. Although their mission was to kill the people who broke into the island at all costs, they were also living beings and were afraid of death. In the end, these ferocious beasts scattered and fled. Although they couldn't escape the island, they stayed far away from Murong-yu and didn't dare to come close. If there are so many ferocious beasts in the 6 places where Yuhua is sealed, I'll probably break through to the 2-star supreme being level after rescuing Yuhua. Murong-yu thought to himself as he strode toward the place where Yuhua's head was sealed. It was still a brocade box, still filled with billions of formations, still on the verge of exploding, just like the Heaven Mountain Range. The heavens are really insidious. Murong-yu immediately contacted Wu Shuang and Yuhua, telling them to leave the island as soon as possible. Murong-yu, you have to be careful. The 2 women warned Murong-yu before leaving the island gloomily. Yuhua was better off. After all, she was just a soul right now. But Wu Shuang was incomparably depressed. She was a titled supreme being, the strongest existence in the holy world apart from the sovereigns. But now, she was reduced to a minor role. She was only responsible for leading the way, and she couldn't do anything to rescue Yuhua. Murong-yu, a 1-star supreme being, had done it all by himself. She was a titled supreme being. How could she not be depressed? But there was nothing she could do about it. She could still help deal with those 9-star supreme being ferocious beasts. But against the billions of formations and restrictions, there was nothing she could do. Rumble. After the 2 of them left the island, the entire island and everything within a radius of 1 trillion miles was razed to the ground. It was like the Heaven Mountain Range. The 2 women couldn't help but curse the heavens for being insidious. If it weren't for Murong-yu, even if they could pass through the formations and kill the beasts and obtain the brocade box, they definitely wouldn't have been able to escape the island in an instant. They would have died without a doubt. Fortunately, Murong-yu had treated the formations as nothing, and fortunately, he had the Hichu Luo-shu, which allowed him to teleport directly. Yuhua couldn't help but cry out in relief. If she hadn't met Murong-yu by chance, and if she hadn't helped Murong-yu by chance, she probably wouldn't have been able to come back to life. This should be your head, right? Murong-yu appeared out of nowhere in front of the 2 of them, then handed the brocade box containing Yuhua's head to Yuhua. Sensing the familiar aura emanating from the brocade box, Yuhua excitedly accepted it. Then, she entered the Hichu Luo-shu to fuse her soul with her head. Come, let's go to the next place. Before he'd even finished speaking, Murong-yu had already soared into the air and flown away. Chapter 1813. What incredible speed! Supremacy Peerless, who was standing beside Moronyu, suddenly exclaimed in surprise. She'd already raised her speed to the limit, but Moronyu was still at the same distance from her. In other words, Moronyu was moving at the same speed as her. On the other hand, Moronyu was only a one-star supreme being. Paragon Peerless couldn't help but sigh at how monstrous Moronyu was. One had to know that Paragon Peerless was one of the 9 titled Supremes of the Holy World. Apart from the other 8 titled Supremes, only the Sovereigns were faster than her. However, Moronyu was already at the same speed as her. Furthermore, Supremacy Wushuang also knew that Morongyu's battle prowess was extremely strong. Even if he couldn't kill a titled Supremacy, it would still be difficult for a titled Supremacy to kill him. Freak! That was the only word Paragon Peerless could think of to describe Moronyu. The 6 parts of Nua's body were sealed in the Outlands, and they were separated by great distances. The Outlands were extremely vast. However, with Moronyu and Paragon Peerless speed, Nua's body was constantly being rescued. During this process, Morongyu's strength slowly but steadily increased. After rescuing Nua's 4 limbs, Morongyu's strength reached the peak of 1-star Supreme. He was only a single step away from becoming a 2-star Supreme. What made his strength soar was the beasts he'd killed and refined. Every place that sealed and suppressed the fragments of Nua's fleshly body was the same. There were the same number of powerful beasts. There were the same billions of formations and restrictions. The same danger. However, they were of great help to Moronyu. Otherwise, where would he go to kill so many powerful beasts to increase his strength? Nua's body is the only thing left. Without it, it's useless even if we rescue all the other parts. After saving Nua's arm, Supremacy Peerless' expression turned grim. Moronyu immediately had a bad premonition. He hurriedly asked, "Where's Nua's body being suppressed?" "Heaven's Eye," Supremacy Peerless said in a deep voice. Moronyu staggered and almost fell to the ground. Paragon Nua's face instantly turned extremely unsightly. The outer realms were filled with dangers, and the slightest carelessness could lead to death. However, there were some places in the outer realms that were even more terrifying. Not even hegemons dared to go to those places. For example, the Heavenly Eye. The Heavenly Eye was a place of death in the outer realms. Absolutely terrifying. It was one of the most famous death zones in the outer realm. According to legend, this Heaven's Eye was connected to the endless starry sky outside the realm. Only those who had passed through reincarnation could enter the Heaven's Eye and appear outside the endless starry sky. As for those who had not passed through reincarnation, they did not dare to take even half a step into the lightning pool, because they would be directly devoured. Legend had it that a long time ago, a titled supreme being had been devoured and died. In fact, the previous sovereign had almost been devoured as well. Some said that the previous sovereign had been injured because he had passed through the Heaven's Eye. Afterwards, the heavens had taken advantage of his weakness and killed him. The heavens had actually sealed Nua's body within the Heaven's Eye, and Nua's body was still fine. Moronyu and all the other supremacies couldn't help but feel puzzled. What kind of existence was Nua? The heavens are a little too sinister. Moronyu couldn't help but curse. Although the places where Nua had been sealed were filled with dangers, none of them were truly dangerous. Moronyu had thought that the same was true for Nua's body. He hadn't expected the heavens to seal Nua's body within the Heaven's Eye. Actually, it's not that they sealed it. They just threw it into the Heaven's Eye. The heavens don't have the ability to enter the Heaven's Eye, much less seal Nua within it. Supremacy Peerless explained. But what was the difference between that and being sealed within? The 3 of them looked at each other, unsure if they should rescue Nua's body or not. In the end, Supremacy Peerless and Nua's gazes gathered on Morongyu's face. Supremacy Peerless hadn't done anything to save Nua. He'd only been responsible for leading the way. Nua, on the other hand, was the one being rescued. Before her body was complete, she wasn't even a 9-star supremacy. Now, it all depended on Morongyu's decision. "Let's go," Let's go take a look. A while later, Murong Yu came to a decision. Of course, they were only going to take a look at the Heaven's Eye. If there was a way, Murong Yu didn't mind rescuing Yuhua. After all, he was already more than halfway done. If there was only one last step left, he'd be very unhappy. Of course, if there was no other way, Murong Yu wouldn't force his way into the Heaven's Eye. He wasn't so noble that he'd throw himself into danger just to save Yuhua. And so, the three of them flew towards the Heaven's Eye. Meanwhile, in the Saint's world, in the true martial sacred hall, Supremacy Zhen Wu sat on the main seat. There were 7 people sitting on either side of the hall. There were only 8 people in the hall, and every one of them was one of the strongest existences in the Saint's world. 8 titled supremacies. 8 of the 9 titled supremacies were gathered here. Apart from the heavens, there were no other enemies in the Saint's world. At this moment, the 8 of them were beaming with joy. Everyone, we've already sensed the existence of the primordial world. I believe we'll be able to destroy the primordial world in less than a year. At that time, Murong Yu will naturally appear after we capture him. Honorable True Marshal said with a smile as he looked at Honorable Ash Wolf and the others. The 7 of them nodded, but Supremacy Shui Tao said coldly, "If we capture Murong Yu, how are we going to split the spoils? After all, Murong Yu only has one body." Hearing this, the faces of all the titled supremacies turned solemn. They had gathered here because of Murong Yu's body, the chaotic celestial body. "I only want Murong Yu's body. I won't touch anything else. It's all yours," Supremacy Zhen Wu said in a deep voice. He also coveted the chaotic celestial body. The most precious thing on Murong Yu's body is his physical body. Why do you have to take Murong Yu's physical body and give us a share of the other things? A sacred race, Supreme Being, said unhappily. Originally, there was something wrong with these supremacies. After all, they were from different races. Although they had joined forces, wasn't it all because of Murong Yu's body? It could be said that apart from Murong Yu's body, nothing else was their main goal. Hichu Luo Shu was powerful, but could he compare to the chaotic celestial body? That was someone who could become a master of chaos. As long as he could become a master of chaos, he would be able to control the chaos. When that time came, what treasures could he not obtain? At that time, he wouldn't need any treasures at all. With a single thought, he could suppress all life in the world. Why would he need any treasures? Therefore, they had to obtain the chaotic celestial body. Not to mention Supremacy Zhen Wu and the supremacy of the demon clan. Even the other supremacies of the sacred clan didn't give them any face. Blood Moon, you're wrong. If it weren't for me, how could you have found the primordial world? Besides, Murong Yu's Hichu Luo Shu is an existence that surpasses a ruler's weapon. Apart from that, there are many other treasures. You won't lose out. If it weren't for us, you wouldn't have been able to touch the primordial world, another supremacy from the sacred clan said. This was a handsome young man. He was one of the 9 titled supremacies, Supremacy Phoenix, the ancestor of the Phoenix clan. Supremacy Zhen Wu's expression was gloomy. The sacred clan now had 5 titled supremacies. In terms of strength, they were stronger than him and the demon clan. However, they wouldn't make a move now. After all, if any of the 8 of them were missing, they wouldn't be able to capture Murong Yu's people. They wouldn't even be able to enter the primordial world. How about this? Let's break into the primordial world first and capture Murong Yu's people. After we capture Murong Yu, it won't be too late for us to discuss who belongs to whom. Another titled supremacy from the sacred clan suggested. This was a female supremacy, Supremacy Rakshasa. If that's the case, then we'll rely on our own methods. Whoever gets the chaotic celestial body will depend on their own abilities and methods. Supremacy, Zhen Wu sneered. If the 5 titled supremacies of the sacred clan joined forces, he wouldn't be their match at all. However, in terms of individual combat power, Supremacy Zhen Wu wasn't afraid of anyone. All right, then it's settled. The other 7 no longer had any objections. After all, this was the best method. However, If Moronu knew that these people were already discussing who he belonged to, wouldn't he be infuriated? Let's hurry up and destroy the primordial world within a year. Let's try to fuse with Murongyu's body before the ruler returns. Supremacy, Zhan Wu said in a low voice. If that wasn't the case, they would definitely be killed by the ruler. After all, Morongyu had already been reserved by the ruler long ago. On the other side, Morongyu had already arrived near the Heaven's Eye. This was Morongyu's first time seeing the so-called Heaven's Eye. An incomparably huge eye was suspended in the sky, just like that. This wasn't actually an eye, but a bottomless black hole. However, this black hole looked extremely similar to an eye. It was also oval-shaped and black in the middle, just like the black of an eye. On the other hand, the outside was white and misty, just like the white of an eye. However, Morongyu discovered that these black and white things were formed by vortexes that exuded an incomparably terrifying aura. It was like the huge mouth of a dormant, primordial fierce beast, ready to devour anyone at any time. Even though he was watching from afar, Morongyu's heart was in his throat, and a sense of danger shrouded his heart. In fact, Morongyu felt his hair stand on end, as if an incomparably ferocious eye was staring at him. Even his soul was trembling. One had to know that they were at least 1 trillion kilometers away from the Heaven's Eye. So this is the Heaven's Eye. Supremacy Peerless looked at the Heaven's Eye with an incomparably solemn expression. They could all sense how terrifying the Heaven's Eye was. Morongyu's expression suddenly changed. This was because he felt a trace of a familiar aura from the Heaven's Eye. It was as if the Heaven's Eye had something he needed. Chapter 1814. This is the aura of the sacred world's origin. Morongyu exclaimed after sensing it for a bit. The aura of the sacred world's origin was leaking out from the Heaven's Eye. In other words, there was at least a portion of the sacred world's origin in the Heaven's Eye. However, although Morongyu sensed the aura of the sacred world's origin, he wasn't too sure. Thus, he summoned the old sage. It is indeed the aura of the sacred world's origin. It should be 1/9 of it, and one portion of it is in the Heaven's Eye. The old sage immediately confirmed. Morongyu instantly became worried. 9 portions of the sacred world's origin had been shattered. Heaven had already forcefully refined 4 of them, while Morongyu had only refined 2. If he wanted to fight against heaven, he had to at least be on par with the sacred world's origin. However, the sacred world's origin was scattered throughout the sacred world, and some of it didn't even reveal itself. Even if one stood in front of it, one wouldn't know that it was the sacred world's origin. Thus, Morongyu had only refined 2/9 of it after such a long time. And this was because he had run into some dog's hit luck and accidentally encountered it. He wanted to find more, but he couldn't. Thus, he had to refine this portion of the sacred world's origin. However, this was the Heaven's Eye, one of the most dangerous places in the sacred world. Even heaven didn't dare to enter. Why did he have to enter? Old sage, do you know anything about the Heaven's Eye? Morongyu mentally communicated with the old sage. Although the Heaven's Eye is in the sacred world, it has never interacted with me. However, the Heaven's Eye is truly dangerous. It can devour anything. Even sovereigns don't dare to charge in, unless they pass through reincarnation. It is said that this is a passage to the endless starry skies. If you don't pass through reincarnation, you will die. Morongyu felt his balls ache. Could he enter an existence that could even kill sovereigns? He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he was stronger than sovereigns. Of course, he would definitely be stronger than sovereigns in the future. But that was in the future. However, Morongyu was determined to obtain the sacred world's origin. If the Heaven's Eye did not contain the origin of the saint's world and only contain Nuwa's body, Morongyu would definitely not take the risk. After all, if he couldn't resurrect Autarch Nuwa, he would only have one less helper. At most, he would wait until he was strong enough to save Nuwa. However, it contained the origin energy of the saint's world. The origin energy of the saint's world was one of Morongyu's greatest trump cards against sovereigns. He would never give up on it. Heaven's Eye is terrifying, But Hichu Luoshu isn't weak either. In addition to the other cultivation techniques and treasures, as long as we are careful, there shouldn't be any problems. Moronyu had already decided. Immediately, he informed Wushuang and Nuwa of his decision. Wushuang and Nuwa were almost scared to death. Moronyu, that's the heavenly eye. It's capable of killing even hegemons. You absolutely cannot go in. Autark Peerless immediately called out to Moronyu. Autark Nuwa stopped Moronyu as well. Moronyu, you can resurrect me when you're strong enough. I'm fine right now, anyways. I don't want you to die because of me. Both Nuwa and Wushuang believe that Moronyu is risking his life for the sake of Nuwa's body. I made up my mind. You two stay here. I'm going to use the heavenly eye to take a look. As he spoke, he prepared to fly into the air. Madness. Madness. Wushuang and Nuwa only felt as though Moronyu had gone mad. Although Moronyu was under tremendous pressure right now, he wasn't going to throw his life away. Moronyu, I'll go with you. Nuwa took a step forward, blocking Moronyu's path. Moronyu was going to save her. If she didn't go with him, how could she possibly go? Autark Peerless, however, hesitated. When she helped Moronyu, she was also helping herself. However, she never thought that she'd be risking her life as well. However, if she stopped here, she felt that she'd let Moronyu down. She couldn't bring herself to say it. However, before she could say anything, Moronyu was the first to speak. Nuwa can come with me, but Wushuang, you don't have to come. I don't want all three of us to die. If possible, you can help me take care of my family. After saying that, without waiting for Wushuang to agree, he had already put Nuwa into He-Tu and Luo-Shu. Then, he unfolded his body and shot toward the Heaven's Eye. I'll definitely take good care of your family. Autark Peerless' resolute voice rang out. By now, Moronyu was already close to the Heavenly Eye. As Moronyu got closer and closer to the Heavenly Eye, the suction force from the Heavenly Eye grew stronger and stronger. In the end, Moronyu didn't even need to fly. Instead, his body was being pulled towards the Heavenly Eye at an incredible speed. When he arrived in front of the Heavenly Eye, Moronyu tried to retreat with all his might. However, he couldn't retreat at all. He could only be pulled into the Heavenly Eye with a whoosh. He couldn't retreat at all. If it were anyone else, they'd probably be incomparably worried. However, because Moronyu had the Hichu Luoshu, he wasn't afraid at all. Although he couldn't charge out, the Hichu Luoshu was even better. It directly teleported him away. Boom! As soon as he entered the Hichu Luoshu, an incomparably terrifying pressure pressed down on Moronyu's body. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, Moronyu's body, which had reached the peak of the Chaos Ancestral Artifact level, began to crack rapidly. Moronyu jumped in fright. One had to know that he'd already circulated his strength to the extreme. Although he still couldn't compare to a 9-star Autark, he definitely wasn't weak. Even so, he couldn't withstand a single blow. Moronyu estimated that he could only hold on for 3 breaths of time. After 3 breaths of time, his body would be crushed. If even his body was crushed, how could his soul not be suppressed? The moment his body was crushed, his soul would also be completely annihilated. Rumble, with a single thought, an incomparably vast amount of life force washed over Moronyu's body like a torrent, repairing his injured body. However, although Moronyu's life force had already reached an extremely high level, it was still very weak. The speed of repair was far slower than the speed of destruction. Moronyu estimated that in his current state, he could hold on for 10 breaths of time without being killed. This was 7 breaths of time more than before. This was the power of life force. No wonder everyone says that even sovereigns don't dare to enter this place. Sovereigns are indeed powerful, but how powerful can they be? This is only the entrance of the Heavenly Eye, and it already has such terrifying power. What about the depths of the Heavenly Eye? How terrifying would the pressure be? As Moronyu pondered this, the Hichu Luoshu transformed into a gust of wind and floated above his head. Rays of earthen yellow light poured down from the heavens, firmly enveloping him within. Rumble. The omnipresent pressure slammed into the Hichu Luoshu, suppressing both the Hichu Luoshu and the Hichu Luoshu's radiance. It trembled violently, as if it would shatter at any moment. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, a tenth of Murong Yu's strength had been used up. A tenth of Murong Yu's strength had been used up in an instant. Just how much energy had been used up? With just a few more hits like this, Murong Yu's strength would be completely depleted. At that time, even an even more powerful treasure wouldn't be able to protect him. However, how could Murong Yu be an ordinary person? The tree of life, whose millions of roots had taken root in the depths of the primordial chaos, trembled, and an incomparably pure wave of primordial chaos energy surged into his body, instantly replenishing the energy he'd used up. He had broken even. However, this was only the outermost area of the Heaven's Eye. If he went deeper, just how terrifying would the omnipresent pressure be? He was still being swallowed by the Heaven's Eye. Murong Yu didn't dare to imagine it. He couldn't imagine it. However, he didn't have anything to worry about. After communicating with the Hichu Luoshu, he discovered that he could enter the Hichu Luoshu from here. As long as he could enter the Hichu Luoshu, he naturally had nothing to fear. Moreover, he still had a chance to revive. It seemed like a long time, but in reality, only a few moments had passed. Murong Yu finally had the chance to look around. He couldn't see anything. He couldn't even see his own fingers. His surroundings were pitch black. Murong Yu tried to use his divine sense again. However, as soon as his divine sense left his body, he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Like a violent storm, it wildly bombarded Murong Yu's divine sense. The pain penetrated straight into Murong Yu's soul. Even though he was incomparably resilient, he still couldn't help but cry out in pain. Moreover, not only did the pressure attack Murong Yu's divine sense, but it also directly annihilated his divine sense. Murong Yu continued to try, but he discovered that his divine sense could only extend to a distance of 3 meters from the surface of his body at most. He couldn't extend it any further. In the end, Murong Yu retracted his divine sense. It was useless to release it, and it even caused him pain. He wasn't a masochist. He couldn't see with his eyes, and his divine sense couldn't see. Where are they going? At this moment, the Heaven's Eye's pulling force was still very strong and fast. Murong Yu still couldn't turn back. However, he was slightly comforted by the fact that the aura of the Holy World's origin was in the direction he was heading. In fact, Niwa could even sense that her physical body was in the same direction. She didn't know how long they were going to float like this. With a thought, Murong Yu was about to enter the He-Tu and Luo-Shu. However, he soon stopped. After he entered the supremacy stage, the Hichu Luoshu had also been upgraded to the level of a supreme artifact. He could unleash the power of a supreme artifact. However, his physical body was still stuck at the level of a primal chaos ancestral artifact. Why don't I take advantage of this great opportunity to upgrade my physical body? Upgrade it to the level of a supreme artifact? Murong Yu immediately removed the Hichu Luoshu. With a swoosh, the Hichu Luoshu rushed into Murong Yu's mind and protected his soul. As long as his soul existed, Murong Yu wouldn't die. 1 breath, 2 breaths. After a few breaths, Murong Yu's physical body was destroyed. Condense. After being destroyed, it didn't disappear. It still existed in the surrounding void like particles. Murong Yu roared in his heart and condensed his physical body again. With the help of the Hichu Luoshu, his physical body immediately recovered. It was slightly stronger. Moreover, Murong Yu was surprised to discover that his physical body actually contained a faint power, the power of devouring. Chapter 1815. Devouring Power. Actually, it couldn't really be considered devouring power. It was an ability that was only faintly discernible. Murong Yu couldn't even be sure that it wasn't just a temporary appearance. Thus, Murong Yu continued to temper his body. His body was constantly being destroyed, and his body was constantly being repaired. Every time he recovered, Yu felt his body grow a bit stronger. However, the pain of his body being destroyed caused even Yu's soul to tremble. It was simply too terrifying. If it weren't for Yu's life force and the Hichu Luoshu protecting his soul, he probably would have been killed by the heavens long ago. Even a ruler wouldn't be able to withstand much of this pressure. Even a ruler's weapon wouldn't be able to withstand it. Fortunately, the Hichu Luoshu was a supreme existence that far surpassed a ruler's weapon. Otherwise, Yu would have had to wait until he was revived. This was why even rulers didn't dare to enter the Heaven's Eye. They didn't have any treasures that surpassed a ruler's weapon. Without such treasures, they wouldn't be able to protect their souls and bodies. The stronger Yu's physical body was, the stronger the devouring power Yu felt was. Finally, after his body had been destroyed countless times, the power within his body finally began to flow like a small spring. This devouring power existed in every single cell of his body. However, the power within each cell was extremely weak. Even Yu couldn't sense its existence. Only when it spread out and merged with his other cells and flowed through his body did Yu gradually sense it. In other words, this power was the power of his body. It existed in every single cell of his body. However, this power was still far too weak. It was completely useless. Even so, Yu still earnestly sensed it. This power was similar to the power of primordial chaos. The power of faith was completely different from the origin energy of the Holy Realm. Not only did it have the ability to devour, but it also had the explosive power to rip apart everything. Right now, there was only a small spring of power flowing through his body. However, this strand of power was already beginning to show signs of savagery. It actually began to devour everything. Devouring power, devouring everything. You could even feel that this power was even devouring other cells. They devoured each other. The direct result of this kind of devouring was that the space between each cell was infinitely shrinking and compressing. As a result, Yu's entire body shrunk and became skinnier than before. However, new cells would soon be produced, allowing Yu's body to recover to its previous fullness. The space that was originally occupied by one cell was now occupied by two cells. In this way, Yu's strength would be doubled if they were the same size. Furthermore, as the devouring power grew stronger, the space between the cells would continue to shrink. After that, Yu's strength would become even stronger. His strength was slowly increasing. However, Yu was also being devoured by the Heaven's Eye. Gradually, he shot into the depths of the Heaven's Eye. During this process, Yu's speed became slower and slower. However, Yu did not know where he was. In fact, it was impossible for him to go back the way he came from. This was because this place was pitch black, and he could not see any reference point. Moreover, there was no reference point at all. The suction force finally disappeared. Yu heaved a sigh of relief and floated in the void without moving. However, although the suction force disappeared, the pressure did not disappear. On the contrary, it became more and more terrifying. At this time, Yu's body was several times stronger than when he first entered the Heaven's Eye. However, he could only resist for 10 breaths of time. I'll cultivate here for a while first, then continue to go deeper. Yu glanced ahead, although he could not see anything. However, he could feel the existence of the origin of the Holy World. It was still in the depths of the Holy World. Similarly, Nuwa's body was also in the depths of the Holy World. This was what Nuwa sensed. Immediately, Yu stopped and continued to temper his body. Time passed. He did not know how long it had been. It seemed to be an era, but it also seemed to be an instant. In short, Yu would choose to go deeper every time he could last for 100 breaths of time in a place. In this way, his body gradually became stronger. Soon, he reached his limit. However, he did not take the final step. Tempering. Finally, this day, Yu's body shook violently. Then, Waves of aura that resembled fried beans constantly exploded in his body like thunder. At the same time, an extremely vast aura erupted from his body. Black light constantly escaped from Murong-Yu's body and finally enveloped Murong-Yu. The black light strangely illuminated the nearby void, allowing Murong-Yu to see his surroundings clearly. He seemed to exist in a vast and boundless world of nothingness. Boom! Crack! Crack! At this moment, Murong-Yu's entire body shattered. However, this time, Murong-Yu did not take the initiative to reform his body. Instead, his shattered body had already reformed on its own. In the blink of an eye, his body had returned to its original state. However, at this moment, his physical body was circulating with streaks of black light, exuding an extremely terrifying power. Boom! 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 At the same time, a second force was formed in Murong-Yu's body. Like a torrent, it flowed in his body, emitting a terrifying aura. This was the power of his body, which had the mysterious power to devour and tear everything apart. Murong-Yu clenched his hands lightly, and a crack sound was heard from his fists. Streaks of black holy light were emitted from his body. Even the extremely terrifying power outside was shaken away by this power and even tore apart. This was the power of Murong-Yu's body. With this kind of power, even an 8-star supremacy would not be able to withstand a punch and would be instantly destroyed, right? Feeling the terrifying power of his body, Murong-Yu's eyes shone brightly, and a satisfied look appeared on his face. His body had broken through. He had reached the supremacy realm. Now, Murong-Yu was simply a human-shaped supreme weapon. Although there were many experts in the holy world, how many could hurt his body, unless it was a ruler who could destroy Murong-Yu's body with a ruler's weapon? Otherwise, even a titled supremacy would not be able to destroy Murong-Yu's body. In other words, the current Murong-Yu is almost invincible just by relying on his body. Coupled with other treasures and battle techniques, he would even be able to fight against a titled supreme being, Murong-Yu. Murong-Yu could not help but let out a long roar. Now, he was filled with confidence, and he could not help but teleport back to the holy world to fight a great battle with Supreme True Martial and Supreme Songlang. However, Murong-Yu soon calmed down. Although he could fight against Supreme True Martial and Supreme Songlang now, he was not confident that he could kill them. However, if he refined this portion of the holy world's origin energy, he was confident that he could kill Supreme True Martial and the other titled supremacies. Moreover, although 3/9 of the origin energy was less than 4/9 of the holy world's origin energy, it would not be easy for heaven to kill Murong-Yu, if that was all. At least, Murong-Yu had the ability to fight back. Whoosh! Murong-Yu immediately moved and flew towards the place where he sensed the holy world's origin energy. However, what made Murong-Yu a little depressed was that even though his physical body had reached the level of a supreme weapon, it still could not withstand the suppression of the Heaven's Eye's power. However, under the protection of Hichu Luoshu, Murong-Yu was able to resist the suppression of the Heaven's Eye for a while. However, as he continued to go deeper, the balance was broken again, and Murong-Yu's physical body was once again subjected to a destructive attack. Do I have to continue cultivating? Break through to the level of a 2-star supreme weapon? Murong-Yu thought to himself. In fact, there was not much difference between a 1-star supreme weapon and a 2-star supreme weapon. It was not like the difference between a 1-star supreme weapon and a 2-star supreme weapon. In terms of hardness, a 1-star supreme weapon and a 2-star supreme weapon were almost the same. However, a 2-star supreme artifact would be able to unleash more power. Murong-Yu would never give up on the holy world's origin energy. Therefore, he could only continue to move forward and temper his physical body. As his physical body gradually strengthened, Murong-Yu went deeper into the heavens' eye and gradually got closer to the holy world's origin energy. Murong-Yu, I can feel it. My physical body is nearby. However, before he reached the holy world's origin energy, Nuwa's voice rang in Murongyu's ears. He was already close to Nuwa's physical body. Therefore, Murongyu changed his direction and quickly shot towards Nuwa's physical body in the direction that Nuwa had pointed out. Not long after, Murongyu saw layers of halos in the void in front of him. The halos were not very strong, but they lit up the nearby void, allowing Murongyu to finally see. Soon, Murongyu approached the void with the light and came near the source of the light. However, when he saw the source of the light clearly, he was shocked. What was emitting a faint halo of light was obviously a body that did not reveal any limbs. Looking from afar, it was the physical body of a woman. Could this be the physical body of Nuwa, who was thrown away by the Heaven's Eye? After being thrown into the Heaven's Eye for so many years, the pressure of the Heaven's Eye did not cause any damage to her physical body. On the contrary, Nuwa's physical body was emitting a faint light. How strong was this physical body? Who was Nuwa? How could an incomplete body without a soul be immortal and indestructible? Murongyu, that is my physical body. Nuwa's excited voice rang in Murongyu's ears. Murongyu nodded. Just as he was about to reach out his hand to grab Nuwa's physical body, the physical body had already shot towards Murongyu. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.